Chapter 1721, Biggest Fools. Chapter 1721, Biggest Fools. Ding Yaolong's appearance instantly caused Han Lu to go on full alert. He didn't dare to wantonly attack people anymore. Although Ding Yaolong was only a fourth severance Grand Elder of a small clan, and although the celestial techniques that he possessed definitely couldn't rival that of elites from three-star clans, his ability to reach the severing mundane tier in such an environment proved the extraordinary nature of his talent. In fact, his talent was enough to surmount the gulf caused by his inferior celestial techniques. This was a powerful opponent. Han Lu looked at Ding Yaolong coldly. He felt like there was no need to speak any nonsense. If he couldn't deal with this opponent, he would simply return to his clan to request help from dividing soul tier elites. Once they came, could they not subdue a severing mundane tier force? Brother Han, has there been some misunderstanding? Ding Yaolong asked with a grave expression. As long as the Ding clan was in the right, they wouldn't need to be afraid of the Han clan. Otherwise, was the Fu clan a mere decoration? Would they allow other forces to provoke them so wantonly? Internal battles within the clan were one matter, and being bullied and provoked by outside forces was another matter. Misunderstanding? Humph. Misunderstanding? Han Lu was also filled with rage. All of your dirty schemes have been revealed, yet you're still telling me this is a misunderstanding. Do you think I'm a stupid monkey? Misunderstand your mom. Ding Yaolong could also be considered as an extremely intelligent person. However, he was completely stumped as to why Han Lu was so furious at this moment. Even if someone were angry, it should have been him, no? Why was Han Lu so angry? Anyhow, he was also angered at this moment. The memorial tablets of his ancestors had been destroyed, and this was a huge provocation. Brother Han, please do calm down. I'll lead you out of Dark Moon City. Even if the Han clan were in the wrong, Ding Yaolong still didn't dare to target Han Lu. Thus, he could only ask him to leave the city so that he couldn't kill more people. Ha ha ha. Han Lu chuckled coldly, and said, "How audacious of your Ding clan. You're but a measly severing mundane tier force, yet you actually dare to provoke the Han clan. How incredibly admirable." He called them admirable, yet his face was burning with rage and disdain. Ding Yaolong's expression instantly darkened. "You've almost unearthed the graves of our ancestors, yet you're still scolding us instead? Even if you're from a three-star force, you still can't wantonly pick on others like this. Then I'll have to offend you," Ding Yaolong said as he lashed out. He was going to subdue Han Lu and expel him from Dark Moon City. However, Han Lu naturally wouldn't cower. He immediately rushed over to battle with Ding Yaolong. They were both tremendously powerful fourth severance Grand Elders, though Ding Yaolong was slightly more powerful in terms of true strength. After all, if he were in a three-star force, he would be talented enough to reach the dividing soul tier even if he weren't talented enough to reach the immortal palace tier. They were both at the fourth severance, yet he was the more powerful of the two. However, this was the ancestral shrine of the Ding clan, and even though more than half of it had already been obliterated, many members of the Ding clan were still present. Moreover, the surrounding lands were also part of the Ding clan's territory. As such, Ding Yaolong naturally didn't dare to unleash his full power. Meanwhile, Han Lu didn't have any such worries. He simply needed to unleash his full battle prowess. Their battle was intense, and even the fourth severance elites of the Long clan and the Duan clan were alarmed. They immediately rushed over to appease the situation. This was Dark Moon City, after all, so the three clans were all in the same boat when it came to dealing with outsiders. Otherwise, the Black Moon sect would also punish them later. With the addition of these two elites, Han Lu was naturally no match for them anymore. Thus, he could only stop his attacks and retreat. His expression was cold as he gazed at the three fourth severance elites, and he said in a menacing voice, "Very well. All of you want to become enemies of the Han clan, am I correct? Brother Han, is there some unresolvable dispute?" the Grand Elder from the Long clan asked patiently. Han Lu pointed at Ding Yaolong, and replied, "Ask him." "Ask me?" Ding Yaolong was completely mystified. "You've already obliterated the ancestral shrine of my clan, yet you're still telling them to ask me? How should I know why you're acting like a madman?" He flicked his sleeves, and said, "I don't know anything. I only know that my Ding clan was almost obliterated by you. Han Lu was just about to say something, yet he suddenly became wild with rage upon seeing something in the corner of his eyes. His hand was shaking as he pointed at Ding Yarolong, and he shouted, "Very well, very well, very well. How courageous of you. How very courageous of you." What was going on? Ding Yarolong and the elites from the Long clan and the Duan clan turned around, only to see a person and a large black dog standing far away in the distance. Apart from them, there was no one else. Was there something wrong with this? Why was Han Lu shaking in anger? However, how could Han Lu not be wild with anger? Ling Han was the criminal who had killed Han Chi. Moreover, the detestable large black dog who had bitten his bum was actually standing beside Ling Han. What did this signify? This signified that everything was the fault of the Ding clan. How incredibly audacious. They actually dared to toy around with him and toy around with the Han clan. Eat my attack. Han Lu roared as he charged toward Ding Yarolong. His eyes were red with rage. He was genuinely enraged at this moment. How many years had he been renowned for? Yet, he had actually been bitten in the bum by the large black dog. Not only that, but his bum had even been exposed to so many people. This was utter humiliation. Although Ding Yarolong was feeling baffled and incredibly wronged, he had no option but to block and engage in combat now that Han Lu was charging over and attacking as if his life depended on it. Meanwhile, the elites from the Long clan and the Duan clan continued to persuade them to stop. The scene was as chaotic as could be. Maro Dai wore a strange expression as he watched on from afar. This was because he was at least 80% sure that this had all been planned by Ling Han. However, regardless of how hard he racked his brain, he still couldn't figure out the cause and effect of everything. How had Ling Han redirected Han Lu's hatred toward the Ding clan? Hang on. Why had Ling Han insisted on joining the Ding clan? Was this the critical point? Maro Dai suddenly came to a realization. The Han clan had already looked for trouble with the Ding clan several times. According to rumors, this was because the physical body of a member of the Han clan had been destroyed while he was adventuring and training in the ancient realm. Moreover, the culprit was supposedly a member of the Ding clan. What if the culprit was Ling Han? If that were the case, then everything made perfect sense. Of course, there were still several more specific problems to this theory. For example, how had Ling Han entered the ancient realm? One had to realize that only those at the dividing soul tier and above could send people into the ancient realm. Han Lu attacked wildly, yet he was ultimately unable to rival 3 opponents at the same cultivation level. The battle stopped once again. However, Han Lu was like a wounded beast who wanted to bite anyone he saw. Grand Elder. Ding Song and Ding Shan called as they flew over. The battle had been far too intense just then, so they hadn't dared to venture too close. What's the matter? Ding Yarolong asked coldly. Everything is because of that evil brat, the 2 elites said as they pointed at Ling Han. In the beginning, they hadn't realized this, either. However, upon seeing Ling Han and the large black dog standing together, they finally gained a rough idea of the current situation. If the large black dog hadn't attracted Han Lu over, would all of this have happened? Thinking about this carefully, Ling Han's insistence on joining the Ding clan was a comprehensive scheme from the very beginning. What? Ding Yarolong couldn't help but exclaim in astonishment. The culprit behind everything was actually a measly Genesis tier cultivator. Han Lu was also puzzled upon hearing this. Ding Yaolong's expression of astonishment wasn't fake. Moreover, how could a 4th Severance Grand Elder be astonished so easily? The 4 severing mundane tier elites instantly turned their gazes toward Ling Han. Ling Han smiled faintly, and said, "Han Lu, Ding Yarolong, congratulations on becoming the biggest fools in history." Chapter 1722 Extraordinary. Chapter 1722 Extraordinary. Ha 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 ha. The large black dog was rolling on the floor and laughing. Upon hearing Ling Han's words, and upon seeing the large black dog's laughter, Ding Yarolong and Han Lu were both angered to the extreme. What a detestable brat. If they still hadn't understood that everything was Ling Han's doing at this moment, then they would have wasted their cultivation as 4th Severance Grand Elders. This brat was far too audacious. He was only at the Genesis tier, yet he actually dared to act so wantonly. Where had his courage come from? What an absolute madman. Meanwhile, Maro Dai and the others were also deeply astonished. They hadn't imagined that all of this had been triggered by Ling Han. More importantly, he had actually admitted his crime, and he was even provoking them further. Provoking 2/4 Severance Grand Elders would indeed give one a sense of achievement. However, did Ling Han still want to live? Ding Hu roared in anger and charged at Ling Han again. He hated Ling Han with a passion, and it looked like he wanted to skin Ling Han alive and swallow him whole at this moment. Perhaps Ling Han was the only Genesis tier cultivator in this world who could enrage severing mundane tier Grand Elders to such a degree. Peng! 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 Ding Hu launched a flurry of attacks, while Ling Han raised his arms to block. His battle prowess was still far inferior to First Severance Grand Elders, so he could only passively withstand these attacks. However, his physique was far too powerful, so these attacks were unable to even make him vomit blood. Everyone was stunned upon seeing this, and there was the sound of many people gulping. This was inconceivable. The defenses of a Genesis tier cultivator could become this powerful? If someone said that Ding Hu was still acting at this moment, who would believe them? Humph. Han Lu chuckled coldly as he grabbed at Ling Han. Boom. His large hand transformed into a pitch-black mountain that was intertwined with the Great Tao. It was incredibly powerful. Tight situation. Retreat, the large black dog shouted as he hurriedly spread his legs and ran. He was extremely slippery, and his speed was also incredibly quick. I'll hitch a ride, Ling Han said as he grabbed onto the large black dog's tail. Whoosh. Because of the large black dog's incredible speed, Ling Han started to billow in the wind like a flag. Let go of me. You're too heavy, the large black dog shouted. Stinky brat, you didn't *T in the morning, did you? Your entire tummy is full of *T. No worries, I believe in you, Ling Han said with a hearty laugh. But Grandpa Dog doesn't believe in himself, the large black dog said as he wagged his tongue. He started to run even quicker. Boom. A giant hand slammed down behind them, yet it completely missed its target. The large black dog was far too quick. Anyhow, this was expected for someone who always ran around causing trouble. Trying to escape. Ding Yarolong charged over, his body wrapped within intertwining regulations. In fact, these regulations had already shrouded his entire body. No one could understand the fury and hate in his mind at this moment. The ancestral shrine of the Ding clan had been obliterated, yet he couldn't do anything to the person who had committed this crime. Moreover, the true perpetrator was actually a measly Genesis tier cultivator. Not only that, but this was a cultivator he had personally allowed into the Ding clan. He had to shoulder these consequences. He was a fucking sinner of the Ding clan. Swoosh. Ding Yarolong accelerated, and his speed was surprisingly even quicker than the large black dog's. He had combusted his life force to forcefully raise his speed. Although he could only maintain this speed for a short period of time, could Ling Han, a measly Genesis tier cultivator, still escape from him once he caught up? Die! He roared in fury as he mercilessly lashed out at Ling Han. Han Lu's mind wavered. He had initially wanted to stop Ding Yarolong because there was most likely some celestial king tier cultivation technique hidden in Ling Han's body. However, after some consideration, he felt that he could still obtain these secrets even if Ling Han were killed. He simply needed to retrieve Ling Han's fragmented soul in a timely manner. Moreover, the Ding clan was indeed innocent, yet he had still obliterated their ancestral shrine just then, so he couldn't help but feel a little guilty. Of course, if the most powerful being of the Ding clan had only been at the third severance, then he wouldn't have taken this matter to heart at all. However, Ding Yarolong was more powerful than him. Thus, he was naturally feeling a little apprehensive. What if Ding Yarolong went wild without any regard for the consequences? The difference between being in the right and being in the wrong was still quite large. Boom. A large hand slammed down, blocking all paths of retreat. With the large black dog's current speed, he definitely couldn't escape from Ding Yarolong. However, Ling Han smiled calmly as he furiously kicked the large black dog's bum. Peng. Combining the force of his kick with the current speed of the large black dog, the speed of the large black dog instantly soared by an unfathomable amount. He just barely scraped out of the range of Ding Yaolong's attacks. Peng! The powerful strike of the large hand caused the entire Dark Moon City to shudder. The mortals in the city were all uneasy and fearful. The celestial realm was far too stable, so there didn't exist any notion of earthquakes or mountains collapsing. Thus, the only cause of such a phenomenon was intense battles between elites. If some shock waves swept over, then anyone who came into contact with them would certainly die. "Ah, little Han, you died such a wretched death," the large black dog shouted in the distance. He patted his iron underwear, on which there was the clear outline of a foot. It was extremely evident just how powerful little Han's kick had been. He then patted his chest, and shouted, "How courageous and mighty. You sacrificed your life to save Grandpa Dog. Little Han. I wish you a peaceful journey through the yellow spring. Grandpa Dog will definitely burn some paper notes of beautiful women for you. As for revenge, these two baldies have committed so many atrocities, so I'm sure that they'll definitely die in no time at all. As such, there's no need for me to deal with them. However, it's a shame about your treasures. If you had already decided on death, you could have at least given those treasures to Grandpa Dog." The large black dog's utterances became more and more preposterous. There was a glimmer in his thieving eyes, and it was clear that he was already coveting the treasures the Ling Han owned. The furious energy dissipated, and the soaring dust and ashes gradually settled back down. When everything became clear again, disbelief instantly spread across everyone's faces. Ling Han was standing straight and proud. Pu. Many people instantly spluttered in shock. Was this brat genuinely at the Genesis tier? He had treated the attack of a First Severance Grand Elder like a massage on his back, and everyone could still reluctantly accept this. However, he had even withstood the attack of a Fourth Severance Grand Elder. What a bloody freak! There was a faint smile on Ling Han's face, yet he was actually smiling bitterly in his mind. Fourth Severance Grand Elders were Fourth Severance Grand Elders, after all. Just blocking a single attack had already exhausted all of his origin power. If Ding Yaolong attacked again, he wouldn't have the ability to channel his indestructible Heaven's Scroll to block for a second time. "Heh! Little Han, you didn't die," the large black dog said as he wiped the non-existent tears from the corners of his eyes. "You made me cry for nothing. Say, how are you going to compensate Grandpa Dog?" "Heh!" Ling Han chuckled and ignored the large black dog. He then turned his gaze toward Han Lu and Ding Yaolong, and said, "What kind of Fourth Severance Grand Elders are you two? One of you couldn't even touch my sleeves, while the other couldn't even injure a single finger of mine. Sigh, I feel embarrassed and ashamed for you two. You've lived like dogs for all these years." Woof, the large black dog barked in displeasure in the distance. However, he didn't dare to leap over and start biting people due to his apprehension toward the two elites. The expressions of Han Lu and Ding Yaolong were as dark as could be. The abilities of the large black dog and Ling Han had far exceeded their expectations. The former could nimbly dash about the space, while the latter possessed heaven-defying defenses. "Who in the world are you?" Han Lu asked gravely. Firstly, it was impossible for Genesis tier cultivators to enter the ancient realm without the help of at least a dividing soul tier elite. Secondly, unless Ling Han was the successor of some large sect, how could he have possessed such heaven-defying defenses? How could he have survived the attacks of Fourth Severance Grand Elders so many times? Severing mundane tier elites should have possessed a crushing advantage over Genesis tier cultivators. This was a commonly accepted fact. Yet, this human and dog were far too extraordinary. They definitely had a profound background. Chapter 1723, Burn. Chapter 1723, Burn. Me. Ling Han smiled calmly before replying, "A true man never changes his name, regardless of the situation. I'm none other than the Ding clan's Ding Xiaochen. Pu." Ding Xiaochen almost choked upon hearing this. His expression was plaintive and pitiful. "Have you become addicted to impersonating me?" Although he still hated Ling Han with every fiber of his being, he wouldn't dare to provoke him even if someone gave him all the courage in the world. "Would you look, Even the fourth Severance Grand Elders couldn't suppress him. Ling Han was an absolute freak. Junior Ling Han, if you continue to spout nonsense, I'll be sure to tear your mouth apart, Ding Hu said, his eyes red with anger. Ling Han shook his head and said, Old geezer, it's not that I'm demeaning you, but you're nothing but trash. Ding Hu roared in anger before charging at Ling Han again. I'll stand here and allow you to attack me. It's your victory if you can harm even a single hair of mine. Anyhow, Ling Han was already exhausted of origin power, so he couldn't run away even if he wanted to. As such, it wouldn't hurt to speak more brashly. Boom. 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 Ding Hu unleashed his full power, yet his attacks were genuinely ineffective against Ling Han. Use the power of regulations to refine him, Ding Yarolong suddenly said. His insight was shrewd, and he quickly discovered the weakness of Ling Han's physique. Understood, Grand Elder. Ding Hu instantly changed his tactics. He chuckled coldly as the power of regulations intertwined around his hands that were pressing toward Ling Han's head. As long as he used the power of regulations to refine Ling Han's head, he could directly obliterate Ling Han's mind and annihilated his soul. Ling Han's mind wavered. However, he didn't dodge, nor did he enter the Black Tower. Pa! Ding Hu's hands grabbed Ling Han's head. Boom! He unleashed all of the power of regulations contained within his body as he attempted to forcefully refine Ling Han. Simply put, he was trying to kill Ling Han and have him return to heaven and earth. That way, he would be as dead as could be. Old geezer, I suggest that you stop immediately, Ling Han said with a faint smile. Ha 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 ha. You're trying to beg for forgiveness now? It's too late, Ding Hu said with a sneer. With his hatred toward Ling Han, he wouldn't stop at this moment even if someone gave him a celestial medicine. He needed to vent this anger, and if he didn't, he would definitely explode with frustration. Hiya, little Han, you're truly in a pinch now, the large black dog shouted. Do you have any last words? Seeing that we're friends, Grandpa Dog will definitely deliver your messages to the right people. Ling Han rolled his eyes upon hearing this. This large black dog was far too detestable. He chuckled and said, Old geezer, don't stop if you dare. Humph. Ding Hu completely ignored Ling Han's words as he continued to unleash his power of regulations to refine him. If you stop, then you're my grandson, Ling Han added. Ding Hu almost vomited blood in anger. How was this brat so toxic? Ha ha ha. Meanwhile, the large black dog was rolling on the floor and laughing. With his understanding of Ling Han, he naturally understood that Ling Han definitely had something to rely on. Thus, he wasn't worried at all. Old geezer, you're truly seeking death, Ling Han said. With a single thought, he instantly activated his 9 heavens flame. Your struggle is futile, Ding Hu sneered. He could sense the flames within Ling Han's body, yet how powerful could the flame regulations of a measly Genesis tier cultivator be? Before the power of his regulations, these flames would be easily suppressed and extinguished. Old man, I've been enduring you for a long time. Now, die. Ling Han suddenly unleashed his power. Boom. The 9 heavens flame erupted from the crown of his head and directly soared at Ding Hu's face. Ding Hu couldn't dodge this attack. Firstly, Ling Han had unleashed the 9 heavens flame using the power of lightning, so its speed was astonishingly quick. Secondly, the distance between them was far too small, so there was almost no space for Ding Hu to dodge. Thirdly, Ding Hu was completely underestimating Ling Han, so he was as careless as could be. After all, which severing mundane tier Grand Elder would treat a measly Genesis tier cultivator seriously? Although Ling Han had already proved the strength of his physique, this was a completely different matter from offensive prowess. Thus, Ding Hu only came to his senses and realized the terrifying power of the 9 heavens flame when it was already about to strike his face. Its power was indeed fairly weak. In fact, he could destroy it with a single breath. However, the regulations of the great Tao that were contained within these flames caused him to feel a sense of apprehension. He would definitely suffer if he were struck by this attack. Ding Hu couldn't help but feel astounded. How could a Genesis tier cultivator unleash such an attack? However, there was already no time for him to ponder this question. Moreover, there was no time for him to dodge, either. He could only spit out a mouthful of extremely pure blood in an attempt to push the nine heavens flame away, or at least buy enough time for him to retreat. This mouthful of blood wasn't trivial, it was formed from his life force. Thus, each mouthful that he spat would severely harm his body. However, he was left with no option at this moment. He had to spit this blood in order to save his life. As long as he lived, he could always find a method to recover his life force. However, if he died, then everything would end. However, Ding Hu was instantly terrified to his core. Although his mouthful of blood had extinguished the flames, a wave of invisible heat still continued to surge toward him, directly slamming into his face and charging toward his divine sense. Ah! Ding Hu screamed in wretched agony. He couldn't spare any effort to refine Ling Han anymore. His legs trembled as he stumbled around. Wang! At this moment, his divine sense suddenly flew out from his head, resolutely abandoning his body. Everyone was transfixed with shock. What's going on? Did Ling Han jinx him? He told him to let go, and that he would regret it if he didn't do so. Ding Hu didn't let go, so he's become like this now? How terrifying. How can there be such a terrifying Genesis tier cultivator? He can even force a severing mundane tier Grand Elder into abandoning his body. However, this wasn't the end. Ding Hu was horrified to discover that even though his divine sense had already left his body, his soul still started to burn. Moreover, these flames were far too terrifying, and they could directly use his soul as fuel to keep burning. Not only that, but the power of regulations was also completely unable to extinguish these flames. If this continued, his soul would be directly disintegrated into ashes. At that time, he would vanish from this heaven and earth once and for all. No. Horror radiated from Ding Hu's soul. After all, everyone would be terrified by this kind of situation, especially those at the severing mundane tier. This was because their lifespan was theoretically infinite, so they more so didn't want to die. I said that if you stop, you're my grandson. Sigh. Ling Han then shook his head and said with a chuckle, however, you're far too willful, so I definitely can't accept you as my grandson. Better that you die and reincarnate as soon as possible. In your next life, remember not to ignore the advice of kind-hearted people. Junior, hurry up and stop the flames. Ding Yarolong shouted as he walked over and glowered at Ling Han. To the Ding clan, each severing mundane tier Grand Elder was an extremely precious resource. After all, they could only raise one such elite every hundreds of millions of years. Thus, the death of such an elite would be a colossal loss. However, Ling Han spread his hands and said, this old geezer wanted to seek death, so there's nothing I can do about it. Then die. Ding Yarolong roared as he unleashed the regulations of the Great Tao at Ling Han. He didn't dare to go near Ling Han anymore lest he suffered the same fate as Ding Hu. However, as a fourth Severance Grand Elder, he could naturally refine Ling Han even if he stood several meters away. In fact, he was actually being far too careful at this moment. Although the Nine Heavens flame was powerful, the limit of Ling Han's cultivation level meant that it wasn't unblockable. Just then, it was because of Ding Hu's carelessness that he had suffered such a fate. Otherwise, a severing mundane tier Grand Elder could definitely block the Nine Heavens flame if they wrapped their body in the power of regulations. However, would Ding Yarolong dare to test this with his own body after witnessing Ding Hu's soul being mercilessly burned? Anyhow, keeping his distance would only mean using a little more time. However, he would still be able to refine Ling Han to death. Chapter 1724, Leaving Dark Moon City. Chapter 1724, Leaving Dark Moon City. Ding Yarolong was completely unaware that if he resolutely attacked, Ling Han wouldn't be able to withstand his power anymore. Although Ling Han had blocked an attack from Ding Yarolong just then, that had already exhausted all of his origin power. As such, he wouldn't be able to block a second attack. However, Ding Yarolong thought that Ling Han's defenses had already reached a stage where even severing mundane tier Grand Elders couldn't wound him anymore. Thus, he directly unleashed the power of regulations to refine Ling Han. Soaring light flashing shadow spatial escape divine technique. Ling Han shouted randomly. Shio. He directly entered the Black Tower. Fourth Severance Grand Elders were far too powerful, and using the power of regulations, they possessed the ability to refine him in just a moment's time. Ling Han suddenly vanished into thin air. Ding Yaolong's expression was extremely dark. He was refining Ling Han, so even if Ling Han performed spatial teleportation, such a technique should have been restricted by his power unless Ling Han was more powerful than him. However, if Ling Han were more powerful than him, would he need to flee? How did he suddenly vanish? With the situation just then, even spatial god tools should have instantly exploded if they were used. Thus, Ling Han's disappearance was a complete mystery. Where is he? Xiao. Han Lu, as well as the fourth Severance Grand Elders from the Long Clan and the Duan Clan, all leaped forward. There was interest and curiosity on their faces. How had Ling Han vanished into thin air in such a situation? Did he truly teleport away? The four elites said in speculation. This was also the most reasonable speculation. I can't detect that junior's aura in Dark Moon City, Han Lu said coldly. He turned his ice-cold gaze toward the large black dog. He couldn't forget the hatred of being bitten in the bum. However, Ling Han was far too important. Not only had he killed a junior of the Han clan, but he was even involved in matters regarding Celestial King tier secret techniques. Gasp! He suddenly thought of a possibility. Perhaps Ling Han was a successor of a Celestial King tier force. Thus, he was able to use all kinds of mysterious techniques. Moreover, unless he belonged to a top-notch force, how could he possess such temperament and manipulation abilities? Han Lu started to feel a little apprehensive. After all, not only was Ling Han strange, but the large black dog was also extremely strange. He looked like a Genesis tier cultivator, yet he possessed supreme abilities that even severing mundane tier Grand Elders couldn't rival. If Ling Han were the descendant of a celestial king, then everything would make perfect sense. The more Han Lu pondered over this, the more uneasy he felt. After a brief moment, he directly grabbed Han Chi and left the Ding clan. He definitely had to report today's events to the Grand Elders of the clan so that they could make a decision on this matter. His status was far too low to decide anything himself. Ding Yaolong didn't stop him. After all, what could he do even if he stopped Han Lu? Could he force him to compensate for the loss of the Ding clan? Ding, who was still screaming in agony, yet his aura was already becoming weaker and weaker. Once the nine heavens flame combusted one's soul, it wouldn't extinguish until the burning soul was annihilated. A powerful severing mundane tier Grand Elder was actually going to die at the hands of a measly Genesis tier cultivator. This was most likely an unprecedented feat in the celestial realm, and a feat that would nail Ding whose name onto the pillar of humiliation for all eternity. In the future, he would most likely be used as an example of what not to do. During some year, some month, and some day, Ding, who, a first Severance Grand Elder, was killed by a Genesis tier cultivator. Grand Elder, Ding, who spoke his final words. Boom. His soul was burned into ashes, and even his body was completely disintegrated by the nine heavens flame. Not a single trace of his existence remained in the world. Ding Yaolong clenched his fists, and it was as if flames were about to erupt from his eyes. Grand Elder. Ding Song and Ding Shan asked carefully. Deploy everyone to look for him. If anyone finds him, kill him without mercy. Ding Yaolong said solemnly. Understood. The Ding clan was wild with rage. In just a short day, their ancestral shrine had been destroyed, and a first Severance Grand Elder had also been killed. This was an unfathomable loss. While the elites of the Ding clan were busy searching for him, Ling Han seized the opportunity to calmly exit the Black Tower. He came across a few members of the Ding clan on his way, yet they were all disposed of by him in a single strike. Was there anyone under the severing mundane tier who could rival him? After leaving the Ding clan, he entered the Black Tower again, completely concealing his aura. When the elites of the Ding clan arrived, they naturally couldn't find any traces of him. After repeating this a few times, Ling Han went to the army encampment to seek an audience with Maro Dai. He needed Maro Dai to help him leave Dark Moon City. The Ding clan would definitely guard the exits of the city, so leaving would naturally be extremely difficult. However, if Maro Dai was willing to help, then who apart from Ding Yaolong could stop him? Upon seeing Ling Han, Maro Dai shook his head, and exclaimed, "You're truly a freak." His face was full of astonishment. Truth be told, even he didn't possess the ability to flee so easily after toying around with 2/4 Severance Great Elders. Ling Han smiled, and said, "Senior is flattering me. Do you want to hide here for a while?" Maro Dai asked with a smile. Although he was only at the 3rd Severance, he wasn't afraid of the 3 great clans. This was because he already had some acquaintances in the Fu clan. Once he advanced to the 4th Severance, he would immediately leave this place and seek a path to become stronger. Ling Han shook his head, and replied, "Please help me leave this city, Senior." Maro Dai faltered for a moment before asking in astonishment, "You want to go to the Severing Mundane Pool?" "That's right," Ling Han said with a nod. Maro Dai looked at Ling Han as if he were a freak. He had only just advanced to the consummate level of the Genesis tier, yet he was already thinking about advancing to the Severing Mundane tier. His voice was extremely solemn as he said, "You need to consider this carefully. Severing the mundane isn't that easy, and if you're not careful, you might even sever your own life." Which Genesis tier cultivator didn't need to spend hundreds of millions of years or even billions of years to prepare? Only then would they dare to sever the mundane. Even as a supreme talent himself, Maro Dai had still prepared for 7 million or so years before advancing to the Severing Mundane tier. Moreover, when had he advanced to the consummate level of the Genesis tier? When he was 30,000 years old. He admitted that Ling Han was indeed more talented than him. However, regardless of how talented he was, could he prepare in 1 year what he had prepared in 7 million years? Maro Dai genuinely didn't believe this. Ling Han smiled, and said, "Rest assured, Senior, I naturally know my limits." "Do you truly know your limits?" Maro Dai pondered for a moment, but he ultimately didn't try to persuade Ling Han anymore. This was because Ling Han's actions just then had been far too astounding. Who could have thought that a Genesis tier cultivator would be able to withstand the fury of a 4th Severance Grand Elder? Thus, it wouldn't be surprising even if Ling Han performed more miracles. "All right, I'll help you leave the city." Maro Dai didn't speak any nonsense, and he immediately started to help Ling Han leave the city. Maro Dai prepared a chariot, and Ling Han simply sat inside as they casually navigated toward the city gates. The chariot was extremely quick, and they arrived at the city gates in no time, where they were stopped by the city guards. "Brother Mao." Ding Shan clasped his hands in greeting, and said, "Why are you suddenly leaving the city?" "Do I need your permission to leave the city?" Maro Dai asked coldly. He didn't give Ding Shan any face. Ding Shan's expression involuntarily darkened, yet he knew that Maro Dai wasn't someone he could easily provoke. Thus, he forcefully suppressed his anger, and said, "Brother Mao, please open the chariot door and your spatial god tool for me to inspect." "What if I say no?" Maro Dai asked calmly. "Please cooperate with us, Brother Mao," Ding Shan said solemnly. He understood that Maro Dai valued Ling Han highly, so he definitely couldn't allow Maro Dai to leave the city just like that. If he helped Ling Han escape, then the Ding clan would truly have no idea where to pursue him. Maro Dai pondered for a moment before suddenly stepping aside, and saying, "Fine." Chapter 1725, Heading to the Severing Mundane Pool. Chapter 1725, Heading to the Severing Mundane Pool. Maro Dai relented far too easily, so much so that Ding Shan found it slightly difficult to accept. However, he didn't hesitate as he said apologies and entered the chariot. Ding Shan used his divine sense to investigate the chariot, yet he couldn't find anything out of the ordinary. He investigated it for a second time, yet he still made no discoveries. Only after investigating it for the 3rd time did he exit the chariot, and say, "Brother Mao, please allow me to search your body." Maro Dai smiled calmly as he raised his arms and signified for Ding Shan to search as he pleased. However, he was feeling slightly astonished at this moment. This was because he had personally witnessed Ling Han entering the chariot, yet Ding Shan actually hadn't managed to find any traces of him. This was truly strange. No wonder Ling Han had been brimming with confidence just then, telling him to let the Ding clan search all they wanted. In reality, Ling Han didn't need to seek his help in leaving the city at all. There were numerous convoys leaving the city these past few days, and with Ling Han's abilities, He simply needed to sneak into one of these convoys to leave without a trace. Maro Dai smiled faintly. Ling Han had most likely asked for his help to bid him farewell. Otherwise, Ling Han could have left without him ever knowing. This young man was fairly interesting. Anyhow, Maro Dai had no spatial god tool on him, so Ding Shan naturally couldn't find anything at all. Ding Shan looked at him in astonishment. Perhaps he was truly leaving the city for a spin? Can I leave the city now? Maro Dai asked calmly. Please go ahead, Brother Mao. Ding Shan ordered the guards to step aside. Maro Dai entered the chariot and continued on his journey. However, after standing on the city walls and gazing at the disappearing chariot for a while, Ding Shan suddenly leaped down and started to tail it. He had a nagging feeling that it was strange for Maro Dai to leave the city at this moment. Combined with Maro Dai's relationship with Ling Han, Ding Shan subconsciously made the decision to tail him. Although he kept a great distance, his divine sense would definitely detect Ling Han if he were to appear in the chariot. However, it seemed as if Maro Dai were truly out for sightseeing. During the dozen or so days, he continued to travel around and visit different sites. This caused Ding Shan to lose most of his patience. After all, he couldn't place all of his wagers on Maro Dai. What if he were only bait? Thus, after tailing him for another 3 days, Ding Shan finally gave up and returned to Dark Moon City. Brat, you can come out now, Maro Dai said. He had naturally detected Ding Shan tailing them. Although Ding Shan had concealed himself extremely well, who was Maro Dai? He was the greatest prodigy behind Ding Yarolong. However, Ling Han didn't leave the Black Tower immediately. Only after waiting for half a day more did he suddenly appear in the chariot. He had no option but to do this. After all, when Maro Dai had called him just then, he had still been making love with the Empress and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden. How could he stop? Thus, he could only make Maro Dai wait for a little longer. However, Ling Han naturally wouldn't reveal this. He simply said, "Thank you for helping, Senior." Maro Dai chuckled, and said, "Even without my help, it would have been easy for you to leave. In a few months, I'll be bringing Zhong Chong to the Severing Mundane Pool. If you come across Zhong Chong inside, then please do help if you're able to." "Definitely," Ling Han replied. He then asked, "Senior, does one only need to enter a special place when severing the first mundane?" Maro Dai nodded, and replied, "Generally speaking, yes. This is because only heaven and earth possess the power to sever the mundane. However, after the first time, one's body will also possess the engraving of such power. As such, one won't need to enter these special places anymore. However, due to the limitations of their talent, some people do indeed need to go to places such as the Severing Mundane Pool every time they sever a mundane. They need to comprehend the mystical power of heaven and earth anew before they can sever the second mundane, the third mundane, and so on." Ling Han nodded in understanding before respectfully bowing, and saying, "Then farewell, Senior." Maro Dai waved his hands, and said, "Farewell." However, he felt some slight pity after saying this, and he continued, "I initially wanted to betroth my daughter to you, but it's a shame that you have a keen habit of causing trouble. I certainly won't feel at ease if my daughter follows you." Ling Han grimaced upon hearing this, and he hurriedly quickened his pace. He genuinely didn't want to be involved in any more intimate relationships. He already had enough lovers to deal with. After walking for several days and finally leaving the range of influence of Dark Moon City, Ling Han let the Empress and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden out from the Black Tower. After all, he couldn't keep them trapped inside all the time. The 3 of them happily continued their journey. After walking for a dozen or so days, they arrived at another city. After entering this city, they immediately boarded a large ship. This could save them heaps of time. Otherwise, they would only arrive at the Severing Mundane Pool when it was already about to open. Ling Han and the Empress seized this opportunity to strengthen their comprehensions. There was only 1 year left, so if they couldn't comprehend enough about their cultivation, they would need to wait for another 10 million years. Or they could also go to another mystery realm to sever the mundane. Because they had an abundant supply of starstones, they bought whatever saint pills they wanted. In their eyes, these saint pills were cheap anyway. Ling Han started to refine alchemical pills in an almost wasteful manner. He cut out the most valuable portion of the saint pills which contained the comprehensions of heaven and earth, only leaving the portion that could elevate one's origin power. Otherwise, refining these alchemical pills would take far too long. He and the Empress took these alchemical pills every day. These were alchemical pills that could be eaten even after one reached the peak stage of the consummate level of the Genesis tier. This was a process of accumulation. Advancing to the severing mundane tier was hugely exhausting, so without enough origin power accumulated, one might end up completely draining themselves during the process. That would definitely be a tragedy. The Empress had already entered the final stages of preparation, and all she needed to do was sever the mundane now. Meanwhile, Ling Han was still continuing to accumulate origin power. After 1 month on the ship, he finally reached the peak stage of the Genesis tier as well. 10 billion heavenly bodies. However, he didn't stop here, and he continued to increase the number of heavenly bodies. This was the meaning of accumulation. Possessing more heavenly bodies wouldn't raise his battle prowess after he advanced to the severing mundane tier, but it could provide him with a huge reserve of origin power when he was in the process of advancing to the severing mundane tier. Another 3 months passed, and Ling Han finally disembarked from the ship with the Empress and the heavenly phoenix divine maiden. They arrived at Moon Scattering City, one of the farthest cities under the Black Moon sect's rule. If they continued forward, they would be venturing into regions controlled by forces of 100 magnificent cities Xiao clan. Meanwhile, the severing mundane pool was located 15,000 or so kilometers away from Moon Scattering City. Theoretically speaking, the severing mundane pool should have belonged inside the territory of the Black Moon sect. However, because this was a border region, and because of the unique effects of this mystery realm, many people would especially travel over if they wanted to advance to the severing mundane tier, regardless of whether they were from 100 magnificent cities Xiao clan or from the Fu clan. Of all the regions ruled by the Fu clan, the severing mundane pool was the best mystery realm for one to sever their mundane. Right now, there was less than 1 year until the severing mundane pool opened, so there were already countless Saint Kings gathered in Moon Scattering City. They were waiting to undergo the most important trial in their life. If they successfully advanced, they would become elites of the celestial realm. At the same time, they would truly break free from the cycle of aging, sickness, and death. However, if they failed to advance, they would almost certainly sever their own life. Moon Scattering City was brimming with people. Although this city was subordinate to the Black Moon sect, many of the forces inside this city were still eternal enemies with each other. Thus, conflicts often broke out, and it was normal to see scenes of chaos or scores of corpses in the mountains. Ling Han and his 2 wives were extremely low-key as they quietly cultivated and awaited the opening of the severing mundane pool. Another 10 months passed, and they left the city to travel to the severing mundane pool. Chapter 1726 Arrival of King Tears. Chapter 1726 Arrival of King Tears. Some time ago, in the Rock Palace in some place in the celestial realm, young Imperial Empress Ling Han has already entered the celestial realm, a woman reported to Hu Niu as she went down on one knee. There was a look of fervor on her face. Their Imperial Empress had successfully advanced to the severing mundane tier 100 or so years ago, and she had more so severed heaven and earth. She had become a king tier among king tiers. This was an achievement that few could rival, even among the holy sons and holy daughters of the other powerful forces. In reality, there was a notion of stronger or weaker even when it came to severing heaven and earth. One had to consider how thoroughly heaven and earth had been severed. The more thoroughly and viciously it was severed, the more powerful one would be. Hu Niu was lazily lying down on a couch. She was a lazy person who definitely wouldn't stand if she could sit, and definitely wouldn't sit if she could lie down. Cultivating was truly torture for her, and if it weren't for that old hag always watching her, she would have gone to look for Ling Han long ago. Pa! Hu Niu suddenly leaped up and laughed heartily, saying, "Where's Niu's Ling Han? Hurry, 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 Niu is going to look for him." There was an expression of indignance on the woman's face. Who was this Ling Han? Why was the young Imperial Empress always thinking about him? In her eyes, the young Imperial Empress was the most perfect person in the world. No man was worthy of her. However, could she ignore the young Imperial Empress question? Young Imperial Empress, we currently don't know his whereabouts, the woman hurriedly replied. When opening the gate to the celestial realm, the point of entrance is largely random. Moreover, the celestial realm is also far too large. As such, it's extremely difficult to determine his whereabouts. Hu Niu wore the vicious expression of a petulant child as she said, Niu doesn't care. Hurry up and find him. Niu wants to see Ling Han. As you wish, young Imperial Empress. It wasn't long before 12 Dragonhawk teams flew out from the Rock Palace, each of which was led by an elite at the Immortal Palace tier and consisted of 10 soldiers at the Dividing Soul tier. They flew toward different regions in the Celestial Realm. They only had a single task, and that was to find a certain man in the huge Celestial Realm. Ling Han, the Empress, and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden headed toward the Severing Mundane Pool, a mystery realm that was formed by heaven and earth. At normal times, the environment here was extremely harsh and unforgiving, resulting in no one being able to venture deep inside. If they tried to forcefully enter, they would be killed by the ferocious power of heaven and earth. The Severing Mundane Pool would only open once every 10 million years, and the meaning of open was that the power of heaven and earth inside would become largely manageable. As such, cultivators would be able to enter and venture into the depths of the Severing Mundane Pool. There, they would be able to sense the mystical power of heaven and earth that was related to the Severing Mundane tier. By comprehending it, they would then be able to sever a mundane or sever heaven and earth. If I'm not wrong, the Ding clan, Han clan, and Xiao clan will all be waiting there for me, Ling Han murmured as he stroked his chin. Am I truly that reprehensible? The Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden instantly gave a silvery laugh. Her husband was indeed a top-notch elite when it came to causing trouble. He was only a Genesis tier cultivator, yet he could already cause 3-star forces to suffer defeat. Moreover, he could even retreat in one piece. This was truly an immensely difficult feat. Let's keep a low profile. They were all dressed extremely conservatively, with not even their real appearances visible. Moreover, they also manipulated their aura such that even Severing Mundane tier Grand Elders could only detect their presence if they stood extremely close. Elites at the Dividing Soul tier and Immortal Palace tier could naturally observe a greater region, yet would such elites come to the Severing Mundane Pool? Perhaps Dividing Soul tier elites might, but as for Immortal Palace tier elites... Ling Han shook his head. This was the territory of a 3-star force, so Immortal Palace tier elites most likely wouldn't venture here. There was still a month or so until the Mystery Realm opened, yet far too many people had already gathered in the surrounding regions. Although these people all belonged to subordinate forces of the Fu clan, there was still quite a lot of conflict between them. It was extremely common to witness battles between cultivators and even between Severing Mundane tier Grand Elders. Xiao Sheng has arrived, someone suddenly shouted in astonishment. Xiao Sheng? Who's Xiao Sheng? Many people asked in confusion. What? You guys haven't heard of Xiao Sheng? He defeated Changsun Liang 2 years ago. Changsun Liang? The Black Moon sect's Changsun Liang? Gasp. It was impossible for news of Xiao Sheng's victory over Changsun Liang to travel throughout the entire territory of the Fu clan in just 2 years. Thus, this piece of news naturally astonished everyone. Changsun Liang was well-renowned, and he was publicly acknowledged as a king tier of the younger generation. In fact, there was no one in the Fu clan who could rival him. Yet, someone had actually defeated Changsun Liang. This instantly triggered a huge commotion. Could it be 100 Magnificent Cities Xiao clan? Yes, it's that Xiao clan. How impressive. They produced a prodigy who's even more powerful than Changsun Liang. They can definitely reach the Immortal Palace tier in the future. Heh, you guys don't know, do you? Several prodigies have emerged these past few years, and Changsun Liang is already a prodigy of the past. Heh. Indeed, the Desolate North has produced Song Ji, and Heaven Holding City has produced Ma Ying, both of whom can be regarded as king tiers. Most astonishingly, the Fu clan has produced a supreme divine fetus. Everyone in the surroundings drew a sharp breath. Even in the celestial realm, the words divine fetus couldn't be thrown around lightly. This represented the most powerful physique in the world, a physique that would appear in fewer than 1 in 1 trillion people. Who is it? Fu Xiaoyun. Not only does she possess a supreme divine fetus, but she's also stunningly beautiful. Just a glance at her beauty can cause your soul to fly into the sky. Is she also coming here to sever the mundane? Of course, if she misses this opportunity, she'll need to wait another 10 million years. To young King Tears, 10 million years is far too long. During this time, their opponents might have already become second severance Grand Elders. Ling Han was also slightly astonished upon hearing this. Another divine fetus had appeared. There were 2 ways to develop a divine fetus. The first method was to be naturally born, and this depended on one's parents and ancestors. According to rumors, one would have a larger probability of giving birth to a divine fetus if there existed a celestial king among their ancestors. Otherwise, one would need to be extremely fortunate. The second method was to cultivate some kind of special celestial king tier cultivation technique. An example of this was Jiyu Daoi, who had accumulated his cultivation for 10 lifetimes before developing a divine fetus. Anyhow, Ling Han was curious about how powerful the Fu clan's divine fetus was compared to the Empress. Meanwhile, the Empress wore an expression of pride and haughtiness. She was confident that she could definitely win. Ling Han gazed into the surroundings. He saw Xiao Sheng, who after nearly 2 years had naturally recovered from his wounds already. Although he had been severely wounded by Ling Han and the Empress at that time, the Xiao clan had treated his wounds without any regard for the costs. He was to the Xiao clan what Changsun Liang was to the Black Moon sect. Moreover, Xiao Sheng had already cleansed himself of the disappointment of losing to Ling Han that day. Moreover, he was now brimming with confidence after his victory over Changsun Liang. He viewed everyone else with disdain. As a king tier, he was naturally proud and haughty. Several days passed, and more king tiers arrived. Song Jithe King Tier, who had recently found fame in the desolate north, was one of them. His battle prowess was terrifying, and many regarded him as invincible among those below the severing mundane tier. Ma Ying was another of the king tiers. She was a precious daughter of Heaven Holding City, and she was also praised as invincible among those under the severing mundane tier. According to rumors, Song Ji and Ma Ying were also distant cousins. Thus, the 2 large clans that they belonged to were interested in connecting through their marriage. If this eventuated, they would most likely become the most powerful force under the rule of the Fu clan. In fact, they might even develop the ability to challenge the rule of the Fu clan in the future. Apart from them, Fu Xiaoyun had also arrived. Moreover, she surprisingly hadn't been accompanied by elites from the Fu clan. She sat cross-legged on a mountain, and her appearance was so beautiful that it was enough to make one's heart flutter. However, there was a sword resting on her lap, and she was radiating with a killing intent that warned others to stay away. Changsun Liang has arrived. Another 2 days passed, and commotion swept through the sea of cultivators again. The cultivators were even more fervent than when Song Ji, Xiao Sheng, and Fu Xiaoyun had arrived. After all, this was a publicly acknowledged king tier. Chapter 1727, Bei Xianming. Chapter 1727, Bei Xianming. Commotion swept through the crowd of cultivators. Changsun Liang was a publicly acknowledged and well-renowned king tier. Even though there were rumors of people defeating him and people rivaling him, none of these rumors could affect his status in everyone's minds. He was someone everyone desired to surpass but couldn't. In fact, he was so powerful that his might was deeply engraved in everyone's mind. This wasn't something that could be changed by a few rumors. Xiao Sheng couldn't help but chuckle coldly. Was there anything for his vanquished opponent to be proud about? He wore an expression of disdain as he crossed his arms before his chest. However, no one paid any attention to his behavior. He was extremely displeased, and he said, "Changsun Liang, do you dare battle me?" Changsun Liang glanced at him, and said, "We can naturally battle after advancing to the severing mundane tier." He wasn't confident that he could win at this moment, so battling against Xiao Sheng was very likely to end up with both of them severely wounded. At that time, neither of them would be able to advance to the severing mundane tier. Changsun Liang had been famous for many years, and his mind as a king tier was also unwavering. Thus, he naturally wouldn't disadvantage himself for such trivial matters. Anyhow, they were still on the path of growth, so was it truly necessary to fight for temporary victory and struggle for temporary fame? However, his reply was also an admission of Xiao Sheng's strength. Otherwise, he could have easily defeated his opponent in 2 or 3 exchanges without speaking a single word of nonsense. It was also because of this that everyone gained a new understanding of Xiao Sheng. However, Xiao Sheng still felt extremely displeased. He could clearly defeat Changsun Liang, so why was he only gaining respect because of Changsun Liang's words? He humphed in reply. After reaching the severing mundane tier, he would definitely pummel Changsun Liang and let everyone know that he was the true king tier. Ha 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 ha. Song Ji stood up and laughed heartily before saying, "Brother Changsun, I also want to spar with you after reaching the severing mundane tier. However, it's best that you don't lose to anyone else. Otherwise, it's beneath me to challenge a loser." Beside him, Ma Ying's beautiful eyes were also burning with fighting spirit. She also wanted to defeat the current king tier to become the new king tier. However, Changsun Liang's expression remained calm. Since he was a king tier, he naturally had to possess a mindset of invincibility. He had to remain unfazed regardless of how many people challenged him. However, he couldn't help but grumble in his mind. If Ling Han and the Empress were here, they could dispose of these people far too easily. They would pummel them into questioning life. Has Ling Han come? He glanced around, searching for signs of Ling Han. However, Ling Han and his wives were all in disguise, and had suppressed their aura. Thus, Changsun Liang naturally couldn't discover them. Meanwhile, Ling Han didn't want to greet Changsun Liang, either. This was because he had offended far too many people, so greeting Changsun Liang would needlessly drag him into his affairs. As for Fu Xiaoyun, she remained silent the entire time. Either she was truly gentle and didn't have any desire of defeating others, or she was extremely confident in herself, and found it beneath her to defeat Xiao Sheng and the others to increase her sense of existence. Members of the Ding clan had also arrived, though they weren't here to send members of their clan into the severing mundane pool, but rather they were here to look for Ling Han. However, there were millions of cultivators here, and many of them were even accompanied by seniors of their clans. Thus, with the Ding clan's power, they still couldn't force the others to obediently cooperate with them. That being the case, would it be easy to find Ling Han? As for the Han clan, they genuinely couldn't extend their influence so far. If they dared to send people here, that would be equivalent to directly provoking the Fu clan. Thus, they definitely couldn't do this. In reality, there were many more prodigies here than just Changsun Liang, Fu Xiaoyun, and the others. Moreover, there were also some cultivators who were slightly inferior, and these people had placed all of their hopes on reaching the severing mundane tier. As long as they flawlessly severed the mundane, their battle prowess would be far superior to those at the same cultivation level. The severing mundane tier was just as the name suggested. However, what mundane matter one severed and how thoroughly they severed it would all affect the quality of their cultivation level. Thus, there existed a notion of the weakest severance, normal severance, and flawless severance. King tiers and prodigies would naturally aim to perform a flawless severance. However, few of them realized that they could sever heaven and earth instead of severing a mundane matter that pertained to themselves. Several days passed, and it was getting closer and closer to the day when the severing mundane pool would open. Everyone started to become slightly tense and nervous. After all, the step of severing the mundane was far too important. Only by succeeding would one genuinely enter the world of cultivation of the celestial realm. "Heh! Look over there," someone suddenly shouted as they pointed at the sky. Everyone looked over, only to see a giant ape in the sky. Its fur was golden, and it was dozens of kilometers tall. However, this was only a mount used to carry a green bamboo ship. The bamboo ship wasn't large, only measuring at most 30 meters in length. However, judging by the golden ape's expression of exertion, this was an incredibly heavy ship. The golden ape huffed and puffed with each step that it took. Which force was this? Look "Look at that emblem," some eagle-eyed person shouted in astonishment as they discovered a moon-shaped emblem on the green bamboo ship. "It's the lunar sect," many people shouted in unison. The lunar sect was also a 3-star force, though it was located fairly far away from the territory of the Fu clan. However, of the nearby hundreds of 3-star forces, the lunar sect could rank inside the top 10. This wasn't a force that the Fu clan could rival. Theoretically speaking, the lunar sect definitely shouldn't have come here. After all, the lunar sect also had mystery realms similar to the Severing Mundane Pool in their territory. Thus, was there any need for them to travel here? Perhaps some supreme treasure had appeared in the surroundings? The giant ape slowly descended with the green bamboo ship. This was an immortal beast, yet its primal ferocity hadn't disappeared yet. It continued to bare its fangs and roar at the cultivators in the surroundings. At this moment, a man walked out from the green bamboo ship. His clothes were elegant, and his figure was slender. As he walked, he radiated with the demeanor of a king tier. This was a dazzling aura of absolute confidence. Severing Mundane Tier, many powerful figures exclaimed in astonishment upon seeing the young man. Although age would become irrelevant after one reached the Severing Mundane Tier, those who reached the Severing Mundane Tier at an age of several million years old or tens of millions of years old would still astonish those around them. After all, this represented their astounding talent. This young man was at most 100,000 years old. Gasp! A Severing Mundane Tier Grand Elder at only 100,000 years old? Could they find such a prodigy in the Fu clan's territory? Xiaoyun, the young man said with a proud and haughty smile as he quickly turned his gaze to Fu Xiaoyun. "I heard that you were about to sever the mundane, so I decided to come here to accompany you. Anyhow, I also need to perform my second severance, so we can enter the Severing Mundane Pool together." Second severance? Gasp! Such a young first severance Grand Elder was already shocking enough, yet this person was actually about to advance to the second severance. This was far too freakish. Fu Xiaoyun nodded in greeting, and a rare smile spread across her face. These two were. Some people knew their relationship, so they told it to everyone else. This young man was called Bei Xianming, and he was the holy son of the lunar sect. Moreover, the Fu clan and the lunar sect had intentions of improving their relationship through marriage, and the couple in question was none other than Bei Xianming and Fu Xiaoyun. Why was it them two? This was because both had obtained the good graces of the Return to Origin Palace, a 4-star force. They could both enter this super powerful force, and of the nearby hundreds of 3-star forces, this was an honor that only the two had received. This information started to spread, and everyone could only listen on in envy. Bei Xianming was a supreme king tier and the holy son of a large sect, and now he even had a stunningly beautiful and powerful partner in Fu Xiaoyun. His life was already perfect, so what more could he desire? "I've heard that there are several self-proclaimed king tiers here. Step forward so I can check you out," Bei Xianming said as he swept his cold gaze across everyone. He wore an expression of contempt as he continued, "Before me, Bei Xianming, who dares to call themselves a king tier?" Chapter 1728, Severing Mundane Pool. Chapter 1728, Severing Mundane Pool. This young man was incredibly arrogant. However, he indeed had the right to be arrogant. After all, he had already become a first severance Grand Elder at such a young age. This was far too astonishing, and it was no wonder that even the Return to Origin Palace had recruited him as a disciple. Chang Sun Liang, Xiao Sheng, and the other king tiers were all extremely indignant. However, the gulf between them was far too large, and this was a gulf that they couldn't surmount regardless of how freakish their talent was. Even Ling Han would be seeking a beating if he stepped forward. The most he could do was ensure that he didn't die. The king tiers all humphed coldly in their minds. They would determine who the true king tier was after reaching the Severing Mundane Tier. A disdainful smile tugged at the corners of Bei Xianming's lips, and he said, "My venerable master especially told me to seize this opportunity to see whether there are any talented cultivators to recruit into the Return to Origin Palace. By the looks of it, all of you are trash. Fuck." Everyone was as pissed off as could be. Bei Xianming was indeed a supreme prodigy, but did he really need to taunt them like this? However, there were also those who were extremely roused by his words. Bei Xianming could recruit them into the Return to Origin Palace? Gasp. That was a 4-star force. If they could join such a force, then wouldn't everyone need to treat them with respect in the future? Thus, many cultivators shamelessly approached him to curry favor. However, Bei Xianming acted as aloof as could be. Anyhow, he had only casually said that he could recommend them to the Return to Origin Palace. Regarding whether they could actually join the Return to Origin Palace or not, this wasn't up to him. One had to realize that only the supreme prodigies of 3-star forces would have the right to be recommended to the Return to Origin Palace. Otherwise, they could only participate in the disciple recruitment ceremony of the Return to Origin Palace. However, only a small number of fortunate prodigies would be able to pass all of the trials. After all, the trials were far too difficult, and only genuine king tiers would be able to pass them. Fu Xiaoyun remained apathetic the entire time, and she would only smile when she was talking to Bei Xianming. What a shame, the heavenly phoenix divine maiden said. That man isn't worthy of her at all. Ling Han involuntarily chuckled, and said, although he's fairly arrogant, the fact that he's reached the severing mundane tier at such a young age is an indication of his supreme talent. However, the heavenly phoenix divine maiden was still unwilling to accept this fact. Bei Xianming seemed detestable no matter how she looked at him. Rumble. There was suddenly a deafening boom as the earth fractured, and it was as if the earth were opening its mouth. The severing mundane pool had been a deep and eerie valley before, yet after these fractures, it transformed into a valley that was countless times wider. Moreover, it was so deep that one couldn't see the bottom. At the same time, there were also countless layers of clouds and mist also drifting across its surface. Even severing mundane tier grand elders couldn't see the depths of this valley. The severing mundane pool had officially opened. Ling Han immediately detected a starkly different power. However, this power was extremely faint and indiscernible. Severing mundane power, the Empress asked as she looked at Ling Han. She also sensed the wisp of starkly different power. Ling Han nodded, and replied, most likely. However, the power here is too weak, so we can only barely detect its presence. We can only properly comprehend it after we enter the depths of the valley. No wonder one had to enter the depths of the severing mundane pool to sever the mundane. This was because only the depths of the mystery realm possessed enough mystical power of heaven and earth for one to sever the mundane. Boom! Like a tumultuous wave, the sea of cultivators started to soar into the valley. Some were at the Genesis tier, while others were at the severing mundane tier. However, none were at the dividing soul tier. Even though these elites had accompanied their juniors here, they all chose to wait outside at this moment. Why? This was because mystery realms like the severing mundane pool possessed unique restrictions against cultivators at higher cultivation levels. Thus, it was extremely likely that they would be killed if they forced their way inside. Even though this was only a mystery realm for severing the mundane, even celestial king tier elites would need to be extremely careful if they wanted to force their way inside, to say nothing of those at the dividing soul tier. Chang Sun Liang and Xiao Sheng weren't in a hurry to enter the valley. They were both king tiers of the current generation, so they possessed absolute confidence in their own abilities. What did it matter if they entered later? Who at the same cultivation level could rival them? Sister Yun, let's go, Bei Xianming said in a haughty voice. He was already at the peak stage of the first severance, and he was more so an invincible king tier among those at the same cultivation level. Thus, he could naturally crush everyone else in the severing mundane pool. He simply needed to remain wary of the environment that was fraught with danger. Fu Xiaoyun nodded in reply as she entered the valley with Bei Xianming. Their robes fluttered in the wind, and they were like an ethereal and carefree immortal couple. Many people gazed at them in envy. Song Ji and Ma Ying followed not far behind. They were also king tiers, though neither of them had reached the severing mundane tier yet. As such, their aura was naturally suppressed by that of Bei Xianming, causing them to seem less dazzling than the couple before them. Chang Sun Liang and Xiao Sheng also entered the severing mundane pool. They could be considered as enemies, so there was strong hostility between them as they entered the valley together. One of them wanted to drag the other off the throne of King Tyr, while the other wanted to seek revenge for the arrow from before. There were sparks flying between them. Let's enter as well. Ling Han saw Zhongchong and Maroshuyu. These two had entered the valley after Changsun Liang. Recalling his promise to Maro Dai, Ling Han decided to enter the valley behind these two cultivators. However, Ling Han hadn't expected for Maroshuyu to also come. She most likely hadn't accumulated enough origin power and comprehensions yet, so she was still unable to sever the mundane. Hence, she had most likely come to experience the mystical power of heaven and earth. By doing so, she would have more experience and confidence when it was genuinely her turn to sever the mundane. There was no path in the valley, so they could only continue to fly and descend. After at least 1 hour, they finally reached the ground. However, it was extremely difficult to land here as the ground was littered with stone spikes. There were fresh bloodstains on these spikes, and there were also corpses lying beside them. In fact, these corpses were still warm. Deadly dangers had already appeared. These stone spikes couldn't be touched, even if one channeled their origin power to hover in the air. Even if one lightly trod upon them without making actual contact, these stone spikes would still pierce their skin. Moreover, once their skin was pierced, they would definitely die. Theoretically speaking, this was already no secret. After all, this had already been discovered countless years ago. However, the fact that people still died here proved one thing: there were always those who were overconfident and insisted on seeking death. The three of them maintained a distance of around 5 kilometers behind Zhongchong and Maroshuyu. This was the limit of how far Ling Han's divine sense could observe, so he could clearly see the actions of the two people before him. Inside the severing mundane pool, the power of heaven and earth was violent, meaning that one couldn't extend their gaze or divine sense too far. Thus, 5 kilometers was the limit of Ling Han's divine sense. The surroundings were frighteningly quiet at this moment, and everyone was fully focused on making their way forward. After all, the severing mundane pool wouldn't be open forever, and it would start to close in around 3 months. If one didn't leave at that time, their fate would most likely be none other than death. This was inevitable, seeing that even celestial kings would frown upon facing the violent and chaotic environment of the severing mundane pool. The valley continued to slope down, yet the surroundings didn't become any darker. Instead, they started to become brighter. This was because some of the rocks were actually radiating with a soft glow. These are radiant rocks, and they possess the great Tao of fire within them. To fire element cultivators, these rocks are incredibly rare treasures, Ling Han told the two women beside him as he sorted through the information in his mind. The heavenly phoenix divine maiden's heart throbbed in excitement when she heard this. She had obtained an inheritance from 3 phoenix kings, and she was also especially skilled in manipulating flames. Thus, these radiant rocks were extremely valuable to her. Ling Han tried to mine these rocks, yet they were far too large and buried far too deep into the earth. There were also jagged rocks in the surroundings, and this made it extremely difficult to get near the radiant rocks and gain enough leverage to mine them. Thus, Ling Han didn't dare to carelessly mine them even with his freakishly powerful physique. In the end, he could only give up in exasperation. It seems like they've come across trouble, Ling Han suddenly said. He discovered that Zhongchong and Maroshuyu had suddenly stopped in their tracks. Meanwhile, 13 unfamiliar cultivators had appeared before them. Chapter 1729 Highway Robbers. Chapter 1729 Highway Robbers. Ling Han didn't rush over immediately. As long as Zhongchong and Maroshuyu didn't come across truly life-threatening dangers, he definitely wouldn't reveal himself easily. Firstly, this was to avoid damaging their confidence and dignity. Secondly, this was to avoid making them overly reliant on others. This place was far too dangerous, so much so that even Ling Han needed to be fully alert. Thus, he naturally couldn't become a babysitter for others. However, Zhongchong and Maroshuyu didn't waste too much time, nor did they need to battle. They easily passed their first trial. Ling Han saw everything clearly. They had passed so easily because Zhongchong had given each of the 13 people 10 starstones as a road toll. This had greatly angered Maroshuyu, and she had been on the verge of charging over and attacking. However, Zhong Chong had eventually convinced her to calm down. Their opponents had outnumbered them far too much, and this place was also far too dangerous. Thus, if they weren't careful, they might even risk losing their lives. That being the case, problems that could be solved with money were naturally best solved using money. Moreover, the severing mundane pool would only be open for a limited time, so one naturally couldn't waste their precious time on meaningless conflicts such as this. As if they had come here for a holiday, Ling Han and his two wives casually wandered over. Halt! Sure enough, they were stopped upon nearing the 13 highway robbers. What's wrong? Ling Han asked in mock astonishment. My brothers and I have been short on funds lately, so we want to borrow some starstones to use. You won't mind helping us, will you? One of the highway robbers said with a taunting smile. These robbers were also eagle-eyed, and they could easily determine what people they could provoke and what people they couldn't provoke. Regarding Ling Han and his two wives? Heh. No worries, Ling Han immediately said with a nod. The 13 highway robbers smiled upon hearing this. What an absolute pushover. He was frightened before they had even started to threaten him. This person was definitely a member of some small clan who had been overly protected since a young age. His Genesis tier cultivation level was nothing but show. Wives, we've come across good people. They know we're poor, so they want to give us starstones, Ling Han exclaimed in delight. His expression was full of innocence and naivety. The 13 highway robbers were astonished upon hearing this. Was there something wrong with this person's ears? One of the highway robbers couldn't help but say, Brat, you're the one giving us starstones. Yeah, you're the ones giving us starstones, Ling Han said with a nod. He then reached over and asked, where are the starstones? Fuck. The 13 highway robbers felt extremely vexed. This brat couldn't even differentiate between you and I. One of the highway robbers stepped forward and said, No, it's you. Oh, no, it's we who are giving you starstones. He should understand now, right? Ling Han continued to nod, saying, That's right, you're giving us starstones. Now, hurry up and hand them over. He was Ting with a straight face, and the Empress and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden could barely contain their laughter. They felt like their husband was incredibly mischievous. He had definitely been negatively influenced by the large black dog. If the large black dog knew this, he would definitely feel extremely irritated. Ling Han had clearly been this mischievous and devious to begin with, so what did it have to do with him? Brat, are you messing with us? The leader of the highway robbers said. He finally came to his senses at this moment. This brat was perhaps stupid, but his two women couldn't also be as stupid as him, right? However, neither of them spoke at this moment, so it was clear that something was wrong. Ling Han smiled and said, It seems like you're not downright stupid, after all. You've finally realized. Detestable, the 13 highway robbers roared in anger. They all glowered at Ling Han. Brat, do you know the consequences of fighting here? The leader of the highway robbers asked coldly. You'll immediately die if you come into contact with any of the stone spikes in the surrounding. So, I suggest that you obediently hand your starstones over. That way, you can buy yourself some peace. Anyhow, it's not too expensive, and we only want 100 starstones per person. TSK, the price has risen. 100 is too little. It should be at least 10,000 starstones per person, Ling Han said with a shake of his head. Huh? Is this brat playing stupid again? The highway robbers exchanged a glance with. They didn't understand why this person was actually unhappy with paying too little. However, they naturally wouldn't be against making more money. Thus, they all nodded in agreement. Ling Han reached over and said, 10,000 starstones per person. There are 13 of you, so that will come to a total of 200,000 starstones. Wives, my calculation is correct, yeah? He turned around to look at the Empress and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden. His two wives naturally nodded in agreement. The highway robbers were extremely pissed off. This brat was messing with them again. Shouldn't 13 people mean 130,000 starstones? One of them mumbled softly. Don't speak any more nonsense with him. Capture him and take all of his possessions, the leader of the highway robbers shouted in anger. He immediately charged over and grabbed at Ling Han. The other highway robbers also howled in anger. They had already held back for a very long time. Peng, 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 peng. Ling Han casually moved around, and it wasn't long before all 13 of the highway robbers were beaten into the ground. If it weren't for Ling Han keeping them hovering in the air with his origin power, all of them would have already been killed by the stone spikes on the ground. The highway robbers were scared out of their minds. They hadn't imagined that this foolish-looking man was actually a powerful being in disguise. His battle prowess was completely unrivaled. They had picked on the wrong person. Ling Han smiled and said, 10,000 each. Are you guys going to pay or not? We'll pay. Of course we'll pay, the highway robbers shouted in unison. Ling Han nodded and removed the restrictions on their bodies, allowing them to stand again. The highway robbers then obediently handed him 10,000 star stones each. This was already the limit of what they could pay. In fact, some of them didn't have enough, and they needed to borrow from others to make the right sum. Not only did they vomit what they had earned before, but they were even exhausted of their own savings. They wanted to cry, yet no tears were forthcoming. Their years of hard work had been stolen by this man. Ling Han counted the star stones as he accepted them. When he finished counting, he angrily asked, "Why is there 70,000 missing? There are 13 of us, so didn't we give you 130,000? Young master, you said 10,000 per person, so 130,000 should be right," the leader of the highway robbers said with a bitter expression. Ling Han's expression became solemn, and he shouted, "Are you looking down on my arithmetic skills? There are 13 of you, so 10,000 star stones each should total 200,000 star stones, no? You genuinely can't count." However, the leader of the bandits didn't dare to retort Ling Han at all. Ling Han was clearly messing with them on purpose. However, even though he knew this, did he dare to complain? The highway robbers had no option but to retrieve more star stones. However, in the end, they could only gather 50,000 star stones. This was still 20,000 short of the 70,000 star stones that Ling Han demanded. Thus, they could only use godly metal and saintly materials to make up for this amount. Anyhow, Ling Han's intention was to milk them dry, so after achieving his aim, he patted his hands and left. The 13 highway robbers could only look on with bitter expressions. "Boss, should we continue?" one of the highway robbers asked. The leader of the highway robbers grimaced and said, "Forget about it. Let's return and continue our successful business as mountain bandits. This place is far too dangerous, and it's not suitable for us." Millimeter. The remaining highway robbers all nodded in agreement. They had already been traumatized by Ling Han. Meanwhile, Ling Han and his 2 wives quickly caught up to Zhong Chong and Maro Shuyu, once again following 5 kilometers behind them. As they advanced, the deadly stone spikes gradually disappeared from the ground. All that remained was jagged mountains and stones of extremely peculiar shapes. This was a relatively safe region, though some of the stones were actually demonic beasts in disguise. As one passed by, some of the stones might suddenly jump up and attack. However, they were fairly fortunate, and they didn't come across any such situation. After advancing for another 2 hours, they arrived before a cliff face that was filled with caves. It looked much like a beehive. Each of these caves would lead into the depths of the severing mundane pool. However, each of them possessed different dangers, and if one chose the most dangerous cave, they could only pray that they made it out alive. Chapter 1730 Accumulating Experience. Chapter 1730 Accumulating Experience. Damn it. Ling Han quickened his pace, yet when he arrived before the cliff face, Zhong Chong and Maro Shuyu had already disappeared. This cliff face possessed a mystical power of heaven and earth that could obstruct one's vision and divine sense. Thus, Ling Han only knew that Zhong Chong and Maro Shuyu had entered one of the caves in the cliff face. However, he didn't know which specific one they had entered. He shook his head and said, "There's nothing I can do about this now. They can only rely on themselves now." However, the Empress didn't think much of this, saying, "As a cultivator, one naturally can't be overly reliant on others. Otherwise, they'll only wind up as trash, regardless of how high their cultivation level is." Ling Han nodded in agreement. Since Zhongchong and Mao Shuyu had dared to enter the severing mundane pool, they were naturally prepared to risk their lives as well. Moreover, without enough confidence, who would dare to enter the severing mundane pool? Let's also choose a cave to enter. Ling Han casually chose a cave before entering with the Empress and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden. The cave wasn't small, and it was wide enough to comfortably fit 5 people side by side. However, the cave was extremely dark, and the floor was also especially uneven, with some places higher and some places lower. After blindly walking forward for several hours, a glimmer of light suddenly appeared before them. The world around them became radiant, and they were surprised to discover that they had actually arrived in a snowy plain. What a strange environment. Snow drifted through the air, and there was not a single footprint on the snow-covered ground. Perhaps they were the first ones to arrive, or perhaps the people before them hadn't left any footprints. They continued to walk forward, lightly treading on the snowy ground. Although they left footprints, these were extremely shallow footprints that were quickly covered by the snow. As they advanced, the cave behind them eventually disappeared from sight. All that they could see was an expanse of white snow. There was no notion of north, south, east, or west. However, Ling Han's sense of direction was extremely strong, and he continued to advance in a direction that was opposite to the direction of the cave. Ling Han suddenly stopped and looked to his left. The Empress also looked to the left with an alert expression. A patch of snowy land there was slightly bulging up, and this bulge had stretched over from far away in the distance. Peng! The mound of snow suddenly exploded upon reaching them, with a giant claw reaching out and swiping at Ling Han and his 2 wives. Immediately afterward, a colossal figure rose up from the snow. This was a giant white bear that had a pair of bat-like wings on its back. These wings were crimson like flames, and it was as if they were burning. The Empress humphed coldly as she stepped forward and extended a finger. A burst of sword chi instantly soared into the sky. Pu. The white bear howled in pain as blood sprayed from its body. It hurriedly beat its wings and retreated, leaving a trail of sanguine blood on the snowy white ground. Roar! The white bear's howl instantly received a reply from the distance. As if losing the pull of gravity, the layers of white snow instantly flew into the air. Only when the roar subsided did the snow slam back down into the ground. Severing mundane tear. Ling Han said solemnly. This was definitely the might of a severing mundane tear Grand Elder. This might far surpassed what Genesis tier cultivators could unleash. As it turned out, the white bear before them was only a cub. However, the Empress didn't show any mercy. This bear had attacked them, so she saw no reason to spare its life. She was extremely ruthless as she aimed to dispose of the white bear in just a few strikes. At this moment, a colossal white bear appeared in the distance. It then flapped its 2 fiery red wings, soaring hundreds of kilometers with each flap. It was swooping toward Ling Han and his 2 wives. Meanwhile, the small white bear howled frantically. It couldn't hold on for much longer. The colossal white bear roared in fury upon seeing this. It was as if it were warning Ling Han and the others to stop, or else it would definitely kill them if they dared to kill the small white bear. However, Ling Han was completely unfazed. After all, would this colossal white bear spare them if they spared the small white bear? He transported the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden into the Black Tower before jumping up and charging at the colossal white bear. Boom! He unleashed his 9 heavens flame. This was his only technique that could threaten severing mundane tier Grand Elders. Meanwhile, the Empress continued to ruthlessly attack the small white bear. After 2 more strikes, the small white bear gave a cry of pity as its divine sense was obliterated. The colossal white bear instantly unleashed an earth-shattering roar of fury. It ferociously charged at Ling Han, yearning to kill him and everyone around him. Ling Han unleashed his lightning sword technique and imbued it with the 9 heavens flame, causing it to become extremely destructive. However, the colossal white bear was at the severing mundane tier, and demonic beasts more so possessed extremely powerful physiques. As such, Ling Han's sword chi was only able to slice some fur from the colossal white bear. Pa! Ling Han was sent flying by the colossal white bear's palm strike. A searing pain shot through his body, causing him to bare his teeth in agony. This bear wasn't at the first severance, but rather at the second severance. Otherwise, it couldn't have made Ling Han experience such torturous pain. It was as if all of his bones were about to break. Ling Han landed next to the Empress, and he immediately reached over to transport her into the Black Tower. At the same time, he didn't waste the small white bear's corpse, either, also transporting it into the Black Tower. The flesh of Genesis tier demonic beasts was extremely nutritious. The colossal white bear went wild with fury. Not only had these two humans killed its cub, but they were even taking its corpse. It launched a flurry of ferocious attacks at Ling Han. It had to kill him no matter what. Ling Han engaged in a life-and-death battle with the colossal white bear. He was about to advance to the severing mundane tier, so battling against a demonic beast at this cultivation level would definitely be extremely beneficial to him. Moreover, casting one's gaze over the entire celestial realm, only Ling Han possessed the ability to challenge first severance or second severance Grand Elders while still at the Genesis tier. At least this was the case among the forces under the Celestial King tier. However, Ling Han wasn't feeling too great at this moment. His godly bones were far from being able to withstand attacks from second severance Grand Elders, so fractures would appear on his bones with each attack from the colossal white bear. The indestructible Heaven's Scroll couldn't heal them in time, so the number of fractures in his bones became greater and greater until they eventually shattered. Ling Han channeled a drop of indestructible true fluid, and instantly healed all of his wounds. He then started to furiously battle against the colossal white bear again. However, what ensued was merely a repeat of his previous pummeling. All of his bones were shattered again. This time, Ling Han didn't have any more indestructible true fluid to channel. Thus, he could only enter the Black Tower to flee from the colossal white bear. Anyhow, he had already battled for long enough, so it was time for him to analyze and comprehend the process of his battle. Ling Han sat under the reincarnation tree, carefully analyzing each moment of his battle as he continued to recover from his wounds. This allowed him to gain a deeper understanding of the severing mundane tier. Although he had battled against Ding Hu before, Ding Hu had been far too weak, and hadn't been able to wound him at all. Meanwhile, Ding Yaolong had been far too powerful, so Ling Han hadn't been able to gain any comprehension from him, either. As for that colossal white bear, its power had been just right. It had left him with many wounds, yet it hadn't threatened his life straight away. If I wanted to sever my own mundane matters this time, I would already have full confidence in performing a flawless severance. However, if I want to sever heaven and earth, then I don't have any confidence at all, Ling Han said in summary. However, this didn't matter too much. After all, Ling Han had yet to genuinely come into contact with the mystical power of heaven and earth. At that time, he would definitely gain some extra comprehension. The three of them exited the Black Tower. The colossal white bear had already left long ago, leaving only a large number of giant craters in the surroundings. These craters were most likely the result of the colossal white bear venting its anger after being unable to find Ling Han. Ling Han and his two wives quickly left this region. After several hours, they were fairly certain that they had already left the colossal white bear's territory. However, their surroundings were still a vast expanse of white. The environment hadn't changed at all. This place was far too dangerous, and Ling Han and his two wives encountered many battles. Apart from the colossal wild bear, they also came across a snow eagle, an ice wolf, and a snow leopard. Some were at the Genesis tier, while some were at the severing mundane tier. Facing those at the Genesis tier, Ling Han directly killed them and placed their corpses into the Black Tower. Their meat was extremely nutritious, so he naturally couldn't waste them. As for those at the severing mundane tier, Ling Han simply charged over to exchange a few strikes. This was in order to accumulate experience. Meanwhile, the Empress had also fought against some of the first severance demonic beasts. She had developed a divine fetus, and her 10 bodies could also split the damage that she received. Although her defensive abilities were inferior to Ling Han's, she could still exchange several blows with the first severance demonic beasts. The husband and wife continued to battle as they advanced, and this left the heavenly phoenix divine maiden feeling extremely envious. Her battle prowess was far inferior to Ling Han's and the Empress. Chapter 1731, Battle. Chapter 1731, Battle. Several days passed, and they finally left the vast expanse of snowy plains. There was a river before them, and the water in this river was extremely chaotic. This was like a parent river that had existed since the creation of the world. One couldn't enter this river wantonly, or else they would be directly killed by its immense and chaotic power. Afterward, they would need to go against the flow of this river to reach someplace near its origin. After arriving at the banks of the river there, they would have essentially reached the deepest regions of the severing mundane pool. In fact, one couldn't fly above this river, either, as the vapor that rose from this river contained all kinds of deadly weapons that were formed from the regulations of the Great Tao. These were weapons that could easily kill elites at the severing mundane tier, dividing soul tier, and even immortal palace tier. If one wanted to travel along this river, they would need to collect wood from the nearby trees to build a raft. Moreover, regardless of which cave one chose before, all of them would eventually lead to this river. If one failed to reach this river, this signified that they had already died in the caves. The trees beside this river were extremely precious. Not only could they be used to build rafts, but the fruits that they bore were also extremely valuable. These fruits were called severing mundane fruits. As its name suggested, this was a fruit that could help one advance to the severing mundane tier. How could it help? These fruits didn't contain power at the severing mundane tier, nor did they contain comprehensions of the severing mundane tier. Rather, ingesting these fruits would allow one to absorb the mystical power of heaven and earth in this mystery realm. Thus, the more of these severing mundane fruits one ate, the more mystical power of heaven and earth one would be able to accumulate while severing the mundane. This would allow their severance to become closer to flawless. Of course, one wouldn't need the help of these severing mundane fruits if they were already supremely talented, and could command a limitless amount of mystical power of heaven and earth with their own abilities. These fruits were used for support, and the most important aspect was still one's own comprehensions. Ling Han and his two wives started to walk along the bank of the river. They had to find the precious trees as soon as possible so that they could cut them down to build a raft. Otherwise, the banks of the river would disappear soon, and there would be no other path for them to walk. Luck was on their side, and they quickly came across a towering tree. Ling Han immediately unsheathed his divine demon sword to fell this tree. He then scraped off its bark and sawed the tree into planks. With this done, he started to weave the bark of the tree into a rope. After using this rope to tie the wooden planks together, a simple raft quickly appeared before him. Ling Han naturally did all of this heavy labor by himself. However, before he could complete the finishing touches, he saw a group of 4 people approaching them. There was delight on their faces as they looked at the nearly completed raft. "Leave the wooden raft here and fuck off," a young man said haughtily. 3 of them were at the Genesis tier, while one of them was a severing mundane tier Grand Elder. However, because he had only completed the weakest severance, he had especially come here to perform his second severance. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to accumulate enough severing mundane power in the outside world. Even so, a severing mundane tier Grand Elder was still a severing mundane tier Grand Elder. They possessed a crushing advantage over Genesis tier cultivators, so they could naturally act as haughtily and wantonly as they desired. The first severance Grand Elder looked to be around 50 years old. He had a short beard, and his hands were clasped behind his back as he looked at Ling Han in contempt. Not only was he here to perform his second severance this time, but he had also been tasked with guarding 3 youths from his clan to perform their first severance. Anyhow, this was also the most dazzling moment of their Qi clan. There were actually 3 members of the younger generation severing their mundane together. If they succeeded, the power of the Qi clan would definitely soar to a new height. However, it was a pity that severing the mundane wasn't so easy. Having 1 out of 10,000 people succeed would already be a very good result. This was a difficult path that was fraught with fatal dangers. Ling Han swept his gaze across the 4 people before asking, "You people want to steal my raft?" "Steal? We're more powerful than you, so you naturally need to obey our commands. Otherwise, die," the young man from before said. There was a menacing killing intent on his face. This was a mystery realm that was completely sealed off from the outside world. In fact, even rare treasures wouldn't be able to initiate contact with the outside world. Thus, as long as there were no witnesses, they could easily kill people to shut them up. Ling Han shook his head. He then looked at the Empress and the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden before saying, "It looks like we can't avoid battle." "So be it," the Empress said. She was naturally unafraid. Ling Han transported the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden into the Black Tower before asking, "Do you want the big fish or the small fry?" "The big fish," the Empress replied with a soaring fighting spirit. "No worries. Call me if you start to struggle," Ling Han said with a smile. He was genuinely unafraid of First Severance Grand Elders. Even if he couldn't kill them, such Grand Elders couldn't threaten his life. The Empress instantly dashed forward to attack the First Severance Grand Elder. Shoo, shoo, shoo. Her 9 clones materialized beside her, leaving 10 Empresses on the battlefield. However, none of her 9 clones were wearing face veils, so their breathtaking beauty instantly left the 4 cultivators from the Qi clan stunned. Holy fuck, holy fuck. How can such beautiful women exist in the world? However, the First Severance Grand Elder was still slightly astonished by the Empress' battle prowess. Her strength had already far surpassed the level of ordinary Genesis tier cultivators, though it was still far inferior to First Severance Grand Elders. In any case, her battle prowess could already be regarded as at the level of pseudo-severing mundane tier Grand Elders. She was a supreme prodigy. Ha ha ha. The First Severance Grand Elder laughed heartily. Although he had already severed the mundane, this didn't mean that he had also severed his mortal emotions and desires. He immediately grabbed at the Empress. So what if she was a pseudo-severing mundane tier Grand Elder? Before a genuine severing mundane tier Grand Elder, she was as weak and frail as could be. However, the reality was starkly different from his expectations. The Empress was extremely powerful, and the First Severance Grand Elder was unable to suppress her in just a few strikes. However, this didn't matter. If a few strikes weren't enough, then he would add a few more strikes. Ling Han also moved at this moment, launching a fist at the 3 Genesis tier cultivators. "You're seeking death," the 3 juniors from the Qi clan roared. They all replied with an attack of their own. Ling Han's fist soared over. Boom. A junior from the Qi clan was instantly smashed apart, directly transforming into a cloud of flesh and blood. He was completely obliterated. In Ling Han's eyes, these 4 people were even more detestable than the highway robbers from before. Thus, he had spared the highway robbers, and only stripped them of their wealth. Now, however, he was killing the juniors from the Qi clan without any mercy. Ah! The 2 remaining juniors from the Qi clan roared with wild rage. They were both furious and terrified. This was because they might suffer the exact same fate. How is he this powerful? The First Severance Grand Elder was completely stunned. Both of these youths were far too extraordinary, with one being even more powerful than the other. How was this possible? If they were king tiers, he should have at least heard about them before. "You all deserve to die," the First Severance Grand Elder howled as he sent the Empress flying with a palm strike. He then turned around to charge at Ling Han. If he didn't stop him, the remaining 2 juniors would definitely be killed by him as well. However, Ling Han ignored him, and continued to attack the 2 juniors of the Qi clan. Pu. Before the First Severance Grand Elder had even arrived, another junior of the Qi clan was mercilessly killed by Ling Han. Ah! The First Severance Grand Elder was about to go crazy. However, he finally arrived at this moment, and he immediately reached toward the last remaining junior, transporting him into his spatial god tool. After doing this, he didn't have anything else to worry about. He immediately turned around to attack Ling Han. "I'll take a handicap of 100 strikes. It's your victory if you can wound me," Ling Han said with a smile. Peng, peng, peng. The First Severance Grand Elder struck out in rage, with his attacks as wild and furious as could be. However, upon striking Ling Han, they could only cause him to waver around from left to right. These attacks were completely unable to wound him. The First Severance Grand Elder was astounded. What kind of freak is he? To say nothing of Genesis tier cultivators, Even fellow First Severance Grand Elders couldn't withstand such wild and wanton attacks from him. Chapter 1732. Chapter 1732, Source Water. Ling Han did not continue just being on the brunt of the beating. He channeled the 9 heavens flame, and boom, the fiery flames burned the skies. That First Severance Grand Elder immediately stepped back. He had a feeling if this flame touched him even in the slightest, he would be burned to nothing. He only stopped when he had retreated more than 300 meters away, his eyes fixed on that flame, and his expression changing swiftly. He steadied his mind, and upon a closer look, he realized that he had made a big fuss over a minor issue. This flame was indeed very frightening, but it was practically impossible that it would be able to penetrate his defenses. So strange, it gave him a feeling of lingering fear, but the fact was that it was not very strong, either. Suddenly, a thought flashed in his mind, and an idea that he did not dare believe emerged. Ancestral flame. According to legend, there were a total of 9 types of ancestral flames in the celestial realm, and they were the source of all flames. They could also be considered as the most direct manifestation of fire regulations. Someone had once foretold that if one managed to obtain all the 9 ancestral flames, they would be able to successfully attain the strongest fire regulations, and place above all the kings. Could it be that this was one of the ancestral flames? Otherwise, the other party was only in Genesis tier, so why did he feel a wariness that he would die if he was touched by this fire? This brat had been blessed with divine luck, and actually refined an ancestral flame. That First Severance Grand Elder's eyes turned bloodshot from envy. Not even a celestial king could absolutely and with complete certainty encounter such an ultimate treasure, yet it was now possessed by a mere Genesis tier. He was going to take this fated opportunity for his own. Ha 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 ha, this is mine. That First Severance Grand Elder grabbed out at Ling Han, regulations entwined around his hands. This would be enough to resist the 9 heavens flame. Ling Han sighed. Any second Severance Grand Elders that would come here would have just barely passed the ordeal during the first Severance aside from Bei Xianming. But even so, this king among kings of Genesis tier like him would still be completely incapable of matching such a severing mundane tier ancestor that was so weak. The difference between immortal level and celestial level was really colossal. No wonder so many people were filled with confidence, and thought that no matter how wide the difference in power they had with others at present, they only had to advance into the severing mundane tier, and it would be equivalent to having begun from the same starting line. Haha, we'll stop here today, and when we meet next, I'll take your wretched head then. Ling Han threw out the wooden raft and left with the Empress, leaving a First Severance Grand Elder roaring in fury behind them. There was nothing that could be done. Great Tao was rippling in the river waters, and perhaps only a celestial king would be capable of crossing the river by force. We have to reach severing mundane tier as soon as possible, Ling Han said solemnly. The Empress nodded earnestly. Even though they were presently invincible amongst Genesis tiers, they would be helpless if they met a First Severance Grand Elder, and this was really very displeasing to them. The river flow was very quick, but there weren't many splashing waves. It was so calm that it was slightly frightening. If one looked closely at the river waters, one would discover that there were patterns of great Tao rippling amidst the water. Too bad, this river water could not be consumed. Otherwise, for cultivators that cultivated water regulations, this would be a precious treasure. There were no living creatures in the waters. This was very normal. If anything could actually survive in this kind of river water, then this kind of living creature would have to be of the level of Celestial King tier, which would be terrifying. Go to the source of the river, Small Tower suddenly spoke up. After entering into the celestial realm, it was as if Small Tower had become invisible, and basically ignored Ling Han completely. According to its words, the celestial realm was abundant with spiritual qi, and was of great help to its recovery, so it could not be bothered to give any regard to Ling Han. He had not thought that it would actually speak up of its own volition at this moment. Ling Han mentally said, "There is definitely no good news every time you speak up. Is it that you have discovered something that is beneficial for your recovery here?" Small Tower sneered, and said, "I suspect that there is source water of the heaven and earth here, and initially planned to help you attain it, but since you're saying this, then I can't be bothered to be a busybody, either. Wait, what is source water of heaven and earth? Ling Han asked hurriedly. Since the heaven and earth have borne the 9 great ancestral flames, then why wouldn't there be mother water that is of the same level? Small Tower said evenly, and then made no further comment after. Ancestral flame, source water, the same level. Ling Han inhaled sharply, and asked, can I also refine it so that it would become my source power? Theoretically, yes, Small Tower said. However, at present, I have no desire to help you get the source water of heaven and earth at all, so that is now completely impossible. Fuck, this proud tower, hadn't he just teased it a little? Ling Han sighed, and said, stop playing around and be serious. Small Tower gave a few humphs, and finally said, it is highly possible that this river is formed from the source water of heaven and earth, so if you trace down its source, you should be able to discover the presence of the source water. How should I collect it? Ling Han asked. This river water cannot be touched at all, the slightest contact would mean death. Without my guidance, you are naturally going to end up dead, but with my presence, everything would be different, Small Tower declared proudly, but did not continue speaking. Clearly, it was holding a grudge. Good Small Tower, my words just now were too harsh just now. Ling Han could only surrender. If it was an enemy, he could still defeat him, but the proud tower was in his body, and he was completely helpless against it. Small Tower put on airs for a while longer, and then continued, in truth, it is very simple. You have refined the 9 heavens flame as your life force, so you only need to wrap yourself in 9 heavens flame, and you will be able to guarantee that you will not be injured by the source water. Will that work? Ling Han was doubtful. The 9 heavens flame hadn't even reached severing mundane tier, so how was it supposed to resist this kind of source water? Stupid, I'm not asking you to directly resist the source water. This is only a sliver of aura that has seeped out from the source water. If the 9 heavens flame could not resist even this, then what right does it have to be called one of the ancestral flames? Small Tower asked in disapproval. But I still have to sever my mortal bonds, and if I veer off my original course, Ling Han was hesitant. If he missed this opportunity of breaking through to the severing mundane tier, he would have to wait for another 10 million years, or would have to look again for a different location to sever his mortal bonds. But if he would also have to wait 10 million years, he would definitely choose to first break through to the severing mundane tier, and come back in future to collect the source water. Sigh, how did I get such a stupid master like you? Small Tower sighed in despair. The whole mystery realm should be formed by the source water of heaven and earth, so if you could gain the source water, that would be equivalent to severing your mortal bonds in a location where the power of heaven and earth is most abundant, and that is still not enough. Ling Han was immediately relieved. This was great, it would not delay either matter. The 9 heavens flame was already incredibly awesome, so if he could gain a source water of heaven and earth and make it into his own source power, what kind of impressive extent would his battle prowess reach? He related this matter to the Empress and the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden. Both women naturally agreed that he should go and collect the source water. In any case, the Empress could enter into the Black Tower, come back out when they arrived where the source water was, and break through into the severing mundane tier there. Ling Han sent out multiple palm strikes, pushing the wooden raft forwards. On the way, he had also caught up with a great many people. He saw that a great battle broke out between some wooden rafts when they encountered one another. The people on board only had to be blasted into the water, and they would definitely be done for. They journeyed for another stretch, and he discovered Maro Shuyu and Zhong Chong to his surprise. Thus, he followed behind the two of them. This decision of his was very correct because these two people encountered quite a number of waves of attacks, and in the last wave, they were not able to resolve the attack. It was Ling Han who moved and helped them resolve their crisis. Maro Shuyu's eyes were sharp, and she recognized Ling Han. Zhong Chong, meanwhile, was embarrassed. When he thought of his previous attitude towards Ling Han, and how now the latter helped him, taking no account of their former enmity, this made him feel quite apologetic. Thus, Ling Han accompanied them on the journey. 2 days later, they went ashore. From here, they could head towards the final location for severing mundane tier, but it was also the most dangerous place in the severing mundane pool, the Cave of Death. Chapter 1733, Severing Mortal Bonds in the Lake Center. Chapter 1733, Severing Mortal Bonds in the Lake Center. Yi, why aren't you guys continuing on with us? Maro Shuyu asked curiously. They should climb ashore once they had reached this place, and head to the Cave of Death. Ling Han shook his head, and said, you guys go on ahead. We still have to head somewhere else. Somewhere else? Hadn't they come to the Severing Mundane Pool to sever their mortal bonds? Then there was only one place they had to go, the final destination, the Cave of Death. Why did they have to go somewhere else? But since Ling Han was not saying, Maro Shuyu could not find out anything even though she was incredibly curious. She could only continue onwards with Zhong Chong in tow and her heart filled with confusion. Ling Han and his group, meanwhile, continued on the wooden raft and traveled upriver. Ling Han thought he had not disappointed the request that Maro Dai had made of him by sending Zhong Chong and Maro Shuyu here. No matter what, it was impossible that he could watch over the two of them for the whole way and be their babysitter. The three of them boarded the wooden raft, but saw Fu Xiaoyun and Bei Xianming had just caught up with them. But what was surprising was they, too, did not climb ashore, but rather continued traveling against the river's flow, as if they were also heading towards the source water. The two sides made eye contact. Fu Xiaoyun was expressionless, while Bei Xianming showed a taunting expression as he asked, mere ants, what right do you have to travel alongside this holy sun? Oh, do you know what is at the source of this river? Ling Han asked deliberately. Bei Xianming humphed, and retorted, what need is there for me to tell you? It can't be that you're pretending to know when you don't. Ling Han laughed loudly. Instantly, Bei Xianming showed killing intent. This little ant actually dared to mock him. He immediately wanted to make a move, but Fu Xiaoyun stopped him, so he could only give up in displeasure. Fu Xiaoyun looked at Ling Han, and said, a senior of my clan advised me that if I wish to sever my mortal bonds in a different manner, I can only head to the source of this river. Only the mystical power of heaven and earth there would be enough to support this method. She paused, and seemed to be watching for any change in Ling Han's expression, but how could Ling Han possibly reveal anything? Thus, she continued, why do you want to go to the source of the river as well? Severing mundane in a different manner would mean striking the heaven and earth. The other was an heiress of a 3-star force, so it was not strange that she knew that she could deliver a strike onto heaven and earth, but what made Ling Han secretly pleased with his luck was the fact that one could only deliver a strike onto heaven and earth at the great river's source, and it could not be done in the Cave of Death. After all, Maro Dai had only guessed that the Severing Mundane Pool could allow him to strike the heaven and earth, but limited by his cultivation level and experience, how could he compare to a noble clan of immortal palace tier? He really had to thank Small Tower. If not for its warning, Ling Han would not be able to strike the heaven and earth. He would either be severely injured or even killed by the backlash, or could only deliver that strike onto himself. Ling Han smiled, and said, how coincidental. I, too, wish to sever my mortal bonds in a different manner. Ha ha ha, you think you can? Bei Xianming laughed loudly. Among the veteran 3-star forces, it was no secret that one could advance into the Severing Mundane tier by delivering a strike on the heaven and earth. But being aware was one thing, and being able to do it was another. Bei Xianming had also once thought of striking the heaven and earth, but in the end, he did not manage to. This strike was still delivered onto his own mortal bonds. And now a brat that had popped out from who knew where actually said he wanted to sever his mortal bonds in a different manner. That was a real joke. Whether I can or otherwise will only be known after I try, Ling Han said, being neither too humble nor proud. Bei Xianming wanted to fly into a rage again. A mere Genesis tier actually dared to speak to him in this manner. Yet Fu Xiaoyun smiled, and said, then let's travel together. She was very curious about Ling Han because she could not see through him at all. It should be known that she had cultivated a celestial technique. It was not very destructive, but she could see through the real condition of others, but she could not see through Ling Han. There was only one reason for this, and that was that his strength was far superior to hers. Was this even possible? She did not believe it. She herself was already a king tier of Genesis tier, so how could there possibly be anyone that was far stronger than her? It had to be that Ling Han had cultivated a secret technique that could block her probe. This made her very curious, and she wanted to know exactly what secret technique that was. Ling Han smiled slightly, and said, "Forget it, I don't like this guy, and this guy doesn't like me, either, so we had best travel separately." He pointed at Bei Xianming. Bei Xianming almost exploded in fury. He was a first Severance Grand Elder, and only he had the right to dislike Ling Han. Was this brat treating him like they were equals? Fu Xiaoyun smiled daintily, however, and only felt that Ling Han was very interesting. She nodded, and said, "All right, I hope you will be able to successfully sever your mortal bonds in a different manner." "Same to you." Ling Han clasped his hands in response. By now, he also felt that it was a slight pity for Fu Xiaoyun to be matched with Bei Xianming. She was clearly too good for him. Bei Xianming looked coldly at Ling Han, his killing intent surging. He definitely had to find some chance to kill Ling Han. Ling Han could see this, and merely smiled faintly. He only had to successfully advance into the severing mundane tier, and even if Bei Xianming advanced into the second severance, so what? He could still crush him. The two wooden rafts advanced continuously, going against the flow of the river. After traveling for a whole 3 days, the source of the river finally appeared ahead of them. The endless river water was surging out of a giant lake, and there was a massive rock in the water, forming an island at the center of the lake. It was really tough for them to reach this point. There were many whirlpools on their way there, and the slightest carelessness could destroy their rafts and kill them. Thankfully, their reaction speed was incredibly fast, or even if it was a first Severance Grand Elder, he could still be finished on the way here. In this place, that mysterious mystical power of heaven and earth was rolling out, and was incredibly abundant. After Fu Xiaoyun and Bei Xianming rowed their raft to stop at the side of the rock, the two of them first climbed ashore, and then stored the wooden raft into a spatial spirit tool. They planned to sever their mortal bonds here. One was aiming for celestial level, while the other was planning to attain the second severance. Ling Han and his group also climbed ashore the island at the lake center, and similarly put the wooden raft away. Meanwhile, Small Tower was mentally speaking to Ling Han, telling him that the source water of heaven and earth should be at the bottom of this lake. To go underwater now? Ling Han shook his head. If he was to dive alone, he would be worried about the Empress and the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden. If he took them into the Black Tower, the Empress would not be able to advance to severing mundane tier. Who knew how long it would take to sever one's mortal bonds, so how could he waste time? Moreover, he, too, had to advance into the severing mundane tier. He thought for a moment, and decided to first sever his mortal bonds with the Empress. After they advanced into the severing mundane tier, he would then set out in search of the source water of heaven and earth. If he could obtain it, he would be lucky, but if he did not manage to, then he would just forget about it. He could always come back after he had become a celestial king. But if he missed this opportunity to sever his mortal bonds, he would have to wait another 10 million years. This was too long a time. He told the Empress this, and the two of them sat down on the island in the lake center, and began their breakthrough to the severing mundane tier. Though the two of them had already reached the peak stage of Genesis tier, severing mundane tier was a completely different beginning. All their previous experience would be of no help. They could only comprehend the unique mystical power of the heaven and earth here, and then attempt to control this power to deliver a strike onto themselves. Because they were inexperienced, this was especially dangerous. In the slightest moment of carelessness, they could kill themselves. And the severing mundane pool was one of the best locations for severing mortal bonds. This mystical power of heaven and earth was also especially strong, so the strength of the strike was naturally astonishing. Ling Han and the others all tried hard to get used to this kind of mystical power. Because Bei Xianming had already struck himself once, he appeared to be very much at ease. Additionally, the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden was also getting used to this kind of mystical power. There would come the day that she would have to strike herself eventually. This mystical power was heartless and cold, and represented the fact that the heavens were completely impartial, and would not take into account wealth, strength, or nobility. In the eyes of the heavens, every existence was equal. And this heartlessness would become a blade to sever the mortal bond that one valued the most, and then one would be able to advance into the severing mundane tier. It was easier said than done. This kind of mortal bond, kinship bond, was also called karmic hindrance and obsession. How could it be severed so easily? Chapter 1734, Breaking Through to the Severing Mundane Tier. Chapter 1734, Breaking Through to the Severing Mundane Tier. The 5 people all sat down cross-legged. They formed 2 clear separate groups, each occupying one side of the island at the lake's center. Bei Xianming was naturally displeased. Those 3 were only in the Genesis tier, so what qualified them to be his equals? If it was not for the fact that Fu Xiaoyun forbade him, he'd really want to throw all 3 of them into the river. Towards this lover, he was considerably pleased. Her status and identity were only slightly inferior to his, and her talent was not inferior to his at all. And precisely because of this, he was still willing to give Fu Xiaoyun enough face despite the fact his cultivation level far surpassed hers. He calmed his mind. Though a prodigy like him no longer needed to come to a severing mundane mystery realm to be able to deliver the second strike, the mystical power of heaven and earth here was endless, and could still decrease some of the difficulty for him. Second severance, come on, he called out mentally. As a man, he naturally had his own pride, always thinking that he should be stronger than his own woman to have mental balance. Otherwise, if he did not break through to the second severance, and Fu Xiaoyun had successfully achieved the first severance, the 2 of them would be equal in cultivation level. His pride would be hurt. Ling Han, the Empress, and Fu Xiaoyun were all closely appreciating the mystical power of heaven and earth. As long as their grasp of it was proficient enough, they could then attempt to sever their mortal bonds. The heaven and earth were impartial, treating all living creatures like straw dogs. This embodied a kind of justice, an absolute fairness. No matter what you were, in the eyes of the heavens, there was no difference of nobility and lowliness, and all were equal. If one wanted to comprehend Great Tao, the best method naturally was to create a resonance with Great Tao. First, one would have to learn to be as heartless as the heavens, and delivering a strike on oneself would be severing the mortal bond that one valued the most, which was equivalent to presenting one's sincerity to the heavens. The more thoroughly this first strike was delivered, the higher the level of agreement one would achieve with Great Tao, and then one's battle prowess would naturally be higher, and it would also become considerably easier for one to comprehend the regulations of the Great Tao in the future. However, Ling Han and the others did not want to strike themselves, but rather strike the heaven and earth. Ling Han sat down in a cross-legged position. Multiple streaks of comprehension came to being in his mind. Striking at the heaven and earth was only a kind of theory, but the true meaning of it was to separate oneself from the heaven and earth. One was a heaven and earth of his own, and he himself was the Great Tao. This was not impossible, because cultivators had journeyed all the way from being weak to becoming strong, and this actually was a process of improving one's inner world. Building mountain and river, constructing sun and moon, forming stars for eternal river. This was actually a miniature version of the greater world, and the only difference was that there were no regulations. Thus, if one wanted to deliver a strike onto the heaven and earth, one would need to borrow regulations from the heaven and earth, turning it into the regulations of one's own inner world. Perhaps there would come a day when this inner world would evolve to become a real universe. Why was it more beneficial to strike the heaven and earth? One method was to strike oneself, and he would become a subordinate of this heaven and earth, and the other was to deliver a strike onto the heaven and earth, and he would become his own existence, which meant being equal with this world. At least that was the case in terms of level. Then, wasn't it very clear which was the better method? But the problem here was, again, how should this strike be delivered? There was no experience that they could adhere to, and no one could tell them what they should do. It was just like severing one's mortal bonds. No one could tell you how you should deliver this strike. This was a test that the heaven and earth had imposed on you, and you would have to completely depend on yourself. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so few severing mundane ancestors in the celestial realm. With an unlimited lifespan, as long as one had enough time, the number of this group should have theoretically increased to a frightening number. But the fact of the matter was that even a 2-star city only had about 1,000 severing mundane ancestors, which was proof of how rare they were. Ling Han and the others were simulating the various possibilities in their minds. Though they were all extraordinary geniuses, the king tiers of the younger generation, it was still extremely difficult to take the step of advancing into the severing mundane tier, especially when they wanted to deliver a strike onto the heaven and earth. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. 5 days later, Fu Xiaoyun suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood, her energy withering for a moment. She couldn't help but show an expression of shock. Previously, she had attempted to sever her mortal bonds, but she had almost severed her own life. Thankfully, before she had entered here, she had once received a boost from the seniors of her clan, which could take a severe injury in her place once. Otherwise, even if she hadn't died, she would have been heavily injured now. Putting aside advancing into the severing mundane tier, merely recuperation would take tens of thousands of years or even a few million years. She calmed her heart. Though she had almost died, she had seen a sliver of hope in the midst of her failure. She was sure that she definitely would be able to succeed. She was a top-grade king tier, she definitely could succeed. In curiosity, she looked towards Ling Han and his group. She ignored the heavenly phoenix divine maiden completely. This woman had not even touched the verge of the severing mundane tier yet. Her primary focus was on Ling Han and the Empress. These two people gave her a feeling that they were unfathomable. Under the rule of the Fu clan, when had two such talents appeared? And they even knew of the other method to advance into the severing mundane tier? Pu. She saw the Empress suddenly throw up blood. Her body actually exploded, but what made Fu Xiaoyun incredibly stunned was the fact that this body actually turned into shards of great Tao. Then, they immediately disappeared, and the Empress reappeared, completely unscathed. Fu Xiaoyun was dumbfounded. What was going on here? She had clearly failed to sever her mortal bonds, and received a backlash from the heaven and earth. She was already dead, but why was she still fine? Was she seeing things? That was impossible. A great Genesis tier could actually be seeing things. She naturally would not know that the Empress had formed 9 doppelgangers, and every single doppelganger could actually be treated as the original. Furthermore, they could all be sacrificed. Anyways, forming another doppelganger would only be the issue of spending a little time. The Empress failed in her first attempt to strike the heaven and earth, and so a doppelganger had died in her place, while the main body was completely uninjured. She's a fucking freak. Fu Xiaoyun was incredibly shocked. Because she was the most outstanding descendant of her clan, she had only received a boost through her ancestor having expended his own life force for her, which life force could die in her place once, but what kind of existence was the ancestor of the Fu clan? A supreme elite of the immortal palace tier. Furthermore, it could not be accomplished by just any ordinary immortal palace tier, but he had to be a big shot among immortal palace tiers. How did this woman manage to do the same? Could it be that she also had a 3-star force as her backing? No, the crux of the matter now was to sever her mortal bonds first. She could consider this question later in the future. Fu Xiaoyun hurriedly gathered her thoughts. She no longer had any means for a replacement to die for her, so the next time she severed her mortal bonds, she definitely had to succeed. There was definitely no second chance for her any longer. Pu. But just at this time, she saw the Empress spurt out blood madly for the second time, her body having exploded again, and then she reappeared, completely fine. A muscle twitched in her cheek, she was completely speechless with shock. This woman was again breaking through to the severing mundane tier, but she had still failed. However, she actually had a secret technique in which a replacement would die for her. Which clan was she actually a descendant of to actually have as many as 2 secret techniques that could die in her place? Fu Xiaoyun was confused again. In this area, the Fu clan was the absolute ruler, and only the Fu clan had immortal palace tier elites, but now an unknown woman actually looked to be even wealthier than she was. How could this not make her disconcerted? She forcibly steadied her attention, but not too long later, she saw the woman throw up blood for the 3rd time, and die again. This time, she was completely numb. Even if someone told her that the Empress was actually the descendant of a celestial king, she would probably be able to accept it with a peaceful heart. Pu. The sound of blood being spat out rang out again, But this time, it was not the Empress, but rather Ling Han. Fu Xiaoyun watched. Ling Han was not like the Empress, whereby he had a secret technique that allowed a replacement to die in his place, but what astonished her even more was that Ling Han actually just wiped away the trace of blood at the corner of his lips, and even showed a sliver of a smile. Then, he began once more to break through. You. Fu Xiaoyun's small mouth was slightly agape, herself feeling that everything was so surreal. Ling Han discovered that Fu Xiaoyun was staring at him, and couldn't help but ask, "Are you all right?" "Of course I am fine, but the question here is why are you fine as well?" Fu Xiaoyun felt like she was about to go nuts. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.